Hello and welcome back to Spectator TV and our weekly Omnibus. My name is Michael Simmons. I'm the data editor at The Spectator. Before we get started, don't forget to subscribe and tap the bell so you never miss an episode. As Keir Starmer flew back to the UK after seeing President Trump, Ben Domenech, The Spectator's US editor-at-large, sat down with the American president to get his reaction to the visit.
He just left.
Yes, the new prime minister.
He was very. I mean,
I
have to say. Well, he was very nice. We had a very good meeting.
He's a little different than Boris.
He's different type. Yeah. Did you watch it? Did you?
Yes,
see
I
it?
did.
What did you think? What was your impression?
I agreed with your assessment that his voice is quite impressive.
No, right? I said that's a beautiful voice. Beautiful. The whole thing. It's highly.
But the problem is that he runs, and your vice president obviously eloquently pointed this out in Munich. He runs a nation now that is, removing the security elements on Apple phones so that they can,
We told them you can't do that.
Yeah, Tulsi, I saw.
We actually told them.
Yes.
Yeah. That's incredible.
Yeah.
That's something, that you hear about with China.
They put people in jail in Britain for praying in their own homes and silently.
But you having that with Biden too, if you think, and it's not Biden, it was the people that surrounded this desk. No, actually, this desk is a different desk.
Yes, it's a different desk. I was going to not.
The other one comes back. It just was in need of a little refurbishment. So anyway, so did you see this? How often have you been in this office? So
I was in this office with every president except for Biden. In fact, I got an interview with someone. That's how old I am in terms of politics.
Well, so you started when?
Bill Clinton.
All right, good. That's not old. That's
it's older than your vice president.
Yeah, well, that's true. He's doing a good job. If you take a look at this, so he had like 2 pictures up.
Yeah.
And he couldn't tell you who they were. And now you look, and we took them out of the vaults. We have incredible vaults of things. They have 3,900 paintings.
Do they inspire you, or do they intimidate in a way, just to see all the different?
Well, it's great. I mean, look, George Washington back there, and Thomas Jefferson. They're great. I even have an FDR up there. A lot of people say, "Why do you have FDR?" I said, "Well, he was a serious president, whether you agree with him or not."
Yeah, absolutely.
He was definitely serious, right?
100%.
And so it's good.
The Starmer interactions. I'm just curious if there was anything that came out of them that you feel particularly positive about in terms.
I thought he was. I will say, I know where he comes from a political standpoint, right? Yeah. I was surprised. We got along very well.
Yeah.
I mean, it was actually, we had a lunch that ended up being longer than we thought. That's always a good sign, longer in the sense that we got along. I thought he was very good. I met him twice before. He came to see me twice before. But this time was the best. And I think we got along very well. And you want to keep that relationship with them. But you're right, their policies are changing. I have a lot of property over there as a real estate person. I own Turnberry, which is a big deal. And I own in Aberdeen, and I own in Ireland. A great thing on the ocean, big, beautiful thing. But beautiful club and a hotel. And they're doing well. The reason the country's doing well from that standpoint is because the dollar is forcing people to leave the country. Our dollar valuation is forcing people to leave the country.
He clearly made a decision early on that he needed to get to know you, but that's not been the attitude of some of these other left-of-center politicians. Chrystia Freeland up in Canada was doing a debate. She's trying to lead the Liberal Party up there now into this election, and she said that there needs to be a nuclear alliance with other European nations and Japan against the United States because you're predatory.
She's terrible. I'll tell you what, I know her very well, and
I'm sorry.
I know. No, I know her very well. She's absolutely terrible for the country. She's incompetent in many respects, and can only cause ill will for Canada. In fact, Governor Trudeau understood that. I call him Governor Trudeau understood that, and he actually fired her.
Yes.
Because of a meeting he had with me. I said, she is so bad. she's bad for the country. You know, if she were talented, I know people that are sort of bad people, but they do a good job running a country. Who seems to be, who's going to get the nomination, do you think?
I don't know. After that debate, they all seemed, she was the nuttiest, but they all seemed pretty nutty to me.
She's a whack.
The conservatives obviously have taken a hit in the polls since some of the comments that you've made that the liberals have leaned into. Do you think that they're still going to be able to pull it out up there?
Well, I think his biggest problem is he's not a MAGA guy, you know? I mean, he's really not. He's not a Trump guy at all.
Yeah. He's more of a throwback Republican.
He's different.
Yeah.
Making a big mistake. They all make that mistake, you know. They think they're going to be the tough guy and they're going to knock out Trump.
Yeah. And
they end up getting the hell beat out of him. So I don't know. I mean, I can't tell you, Pierre. I just don't know. I don't like what he's saying about me. It's just not positive about me. And we've done a great job. We got elected when I would say the odds were pretty much against. I always felt, you know, it's very interesting. People say the greatest comeback in political history, like you said, and I don't even view it as a comeback. The election of 2020 was rigged. It was a rigged election, totally rigged election. And I don't forget that either. Totally rigged. And but this one was much bigger. I will say, a lot of people say that historically this is so much bigger than if I had done it the more traditional way.
You know, a lot of the people who played a significant role in that election, particularly on the tech side of things, have come around to support you.
Yeah.
How much?
I had dinner with Jeff Bezos last night.
How much do you trust someone like Jeff Bezos, one of these billionaires,
Look,
to be
you know,
truly in that?
Who do I trust? I mean, who do you trust? Do you trust anybody? These are very smart guys. And I always say to them, we have dinners together, usually started by them. I'm so busy with all of this between China, Russia, Ukraine. I've got more things happening. But I always love to just sort of look at them and said, hi, where'd you come from? I came from Hawaii to have dinner. That was good. I said, would you have been here if I lost? You know, I always say, would you have been here if I lost? And they never answer that question. Actually, they just sort of shy away from it.
If you trust him, do you trust him? You just paid a lot of money for James Bond. Do you trust him to make him great again?
Well, so who paid a lot of money? Did he?
Jeff Bezos.
Oh, did he buy the James Bond?
He bought the rest of the franchise. He bought it away from the Broccoli family. So
oh, really?
Total control. He's asking Twitter, he's asking X what they want in the next James
that's
Bond.
Interesting. Well, James Bond. Did he pay a lot?
Yes, undisclosed, but rumors of $1 billion.
So it's a lot. So. I like them. I tell you what, I like these guys, but I have to. So when you ask about the difference, so the first time these guys were bitter enemies. I never even understood it. I didn't know them. I didn't know Zuckerberg. I didn't know Jeff. When you look at the inauguration, it was a who's who of every single one of them. Every single guy was there. But anyway, every single person was here.
Their priorities, though, and the kind of populist priorities of your voters don't necessarily align on everything.
Probably.
So are you going to have to tell them no on some of the things that they're going to ask of you?
Sure. I just do what's right. You know, I have a lot of money. I don't need money. I don't need anything. One of the things we're doing over here is very interesting. So I'm a very good developer. I do it really good. You can ask a lot of people. I mean, I did it really well for a long time. And they've always needed a ballroom here. It's big, you know, it's complicated because of the architectural structures, the architectural heritage of the White House. And one of the things I'm going to do, and it was sort of interesting, who gets to approve it? You do, sir. I said, I do. Normally I have to go to zoning. You know, I go through the zoning, and I've always been a king of zoning. I got whatever, but I do good work. So one of the things I'm going to do is build a beautiful, magnificent ballroom.
Oh, really?
At the White House. Beautiful ballroom. They always wanted to have a, hey, get me the picture. There's a picture of a ballroom that I have that you show. And it's keeps my real estate juices flowing, but it'll be beautiful. But they've always wanted a ballroom. You know, they only have the East Room, which is really very small.
You know, one thing that's been interesting, I'm just looking at this picture of the Gulf.
Yeah.
You know, you've had some very positive, I think, reaction to the things you've been saying about Panama. Do you think that more people should be looking, from America, more businesses should be looking to invest in Panama versus perhaps Mexico or something like that?
Well, I had a very bad experience in Panama. I built a building there with a group, and it was a beautiful building. It's the tallest building in South America.
Yes.
And the government, this is probably 13 years ago, the government was very difficult.
Really?
And the building was successful. I made, it was a deal. I made a lot of money on it. But basically,
Mar-a-Lago ballroom?
yeah, look at this. So it'll be something like that inside.
Well, that'll be quite the place.
That's what they're looking for that so badly.
That's fantastic.
For years. They put tents up on the lawn. You can't really
Yeah,
have
I
that.
know. I've seen
And a
it,
tent
I've
is
seen them
not
do it
good.
before, especially with fancy people in high heels trying to walk
And
across
soft
the
and soft plastic.
grass. She knows exactly what I'm talking
Yes.
about.
And soft plastic roofs. Well, I'll go another one. Let me give you then, as long as. So, you've been here many times.
Yeah.
You see the grass outside,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So we're going to make that into a stone surface because you can't have it. Yesterday we had a lot of press here because for the obvious.
It just
right?
turns into mud.
They can't stand on it.
Yeah.
So we're doing a beautiful. It's going to be beautiful. It's going to look. I think it's actually going to look better, but some people would like to leave it. But the problem is you can't. We had the press here yesterday. You see the women? They're going crazy. The grass was wet. Their heels are going right through the grass, like 4 inches deep. It was so we're going to make that into a
Can
beautiful.
I ask you a question about the press? There's an anchor named Jake Tapper you may have heard of.
Yeah.
I recall an interaction that he had with your daughter-in-law about Joe Biden's mental decline, where he accused her of mocking his stutter. And now he's announced just the other day that he has a new book on the whole thing. Do you think
Bad
it's
timing.
wrong for him to profit from a conspiracy that he was
Yeah.
basically part of?
I thought that interchange, because I saw it yesterday. I thought, she's an amazing person. She's very smart, I actually put her in charge of the RNC, along with Michael Wadley. And she's really, and nobody complained about nepotism. She's such a smart person. And got the job done, finished it up, said, Dad, now I want to go back home. Didn't want to stay and have fun. She could have been senator very easily in North Carolina if she wanted that. In fact, Ted Budd, who's doing a great job, but he said, I'm not running if she runs. Nobody could have beaten her. But she's amazing. But I watched that interchange, and I thought her attitude was so cool. She said, the attitude of just amazement that a man could do this. And he could say, well, he's lost tremendous credibility, but everybody has.
Yeah, I mean, Margaret Brennan the other day, interacting with Secretary Rubio, saying that the Holocaust was caused by free speech. I mean,
Margaret
what do you think
Brennan
when you
is-
see something like that?
I call it deface the nation. Margaret Brennan is like anybody on the street that you could take and say, go in and ask a few questions. That was so bad.
Well, it's embarrassing.
I don't get how do you hire some of these people?
Well, it's also embarrassing how quickly. I mean, you saw the 60 Minutes reaction to what the vice president was saying about German censorship. They did this whole thing defending German censorship. If you're someone like me in media, it feels like they're just leaning into the idea that if they ever get the reins of power again, they're just going to censor Americans again. They're just going to propagandize like they have. How do you prevent something like that?
Well, first Jake and then 60 Minutes, because I got to tell you about 60 Minutes. It was amazing. But how anybody could have said that he's at the top of his game. And let me tell you, if you're not at the top of your game, and I know people that are much older than him that are at the top of their game. I know people that are older than him that I've known for a long time, and they're sharper at 88 than they were when they were 58. But he's not. And, I know all of his opponents, the heads of every country. I've gotten to know all of them very well. They're all at the top of their game, and you can't have that. That's why we're in this war. That's why Afghanistan happened, which, as you said, led to a lot of problems beyond even Afghanistan, including the deaths and all of the horrible. We had 42 soldiers without legs, arms. The face was Nobody ever talks about them. And we had the 13 that died. How a legitimate journalist can try and stick up for that.
Mm-hmm.
And I watched him, and he looked so stupid, you know.
Well,
so
a lot
stupid.
of people definitely did.
The only thing I can say about him is he did the debate,
Yeah.
and he was very, very fair. And so was Dana, or as Dana, as she would go. So was Dana.
But they both also looked a bit surprised by what they were seeing play out in front of them.
Yeah, yeah, but they were still, I was very surprised because, you know, I took that debate knowing it was CNN and knowing I had two very, very hostile anchors. I think you're great too. I love watching.
Well,
I love watching you on television.
I appreciate it.
And you have some good guys you work with too.
I do. One more.
Yeah, but just
yeah.
so it's so hard to believe that these guys could keep their credibility. So let me ask you. So we go to the debate, and I walk in, and I sort of look. He wasn't looking good, but then he had a lot of white, very white, too white. You know, if he did better in the debate, would he have been changed or not? If he was normal in the debate, would it have changed, or was the debate? He blames the debate for the reason he had to get out.
Yeah.
It was just too bad.
Yeah. Well, I think that's one of the reasons why he actually looked pretty happy when you met him after the election.
But I asked him, you know, I went to the White House a few months before this all happened. I guess I had won, and not just the sit down before, but I went there. And he asked for a meeting, and I went, and we talked for a little while. And at first he talked so low. Mm-hmm. And then he started getting more, and I asked him, I said, so who do you blame? Because he was very angry. You know, he's a very angry guy, actually. And he said, I blame Barack. And I never think of him as Barack. You know, you always hear Obama. You say, you have to think about that for a second. And he said, and I also blame Nancy Pelosi. I said, what about the vice president? He said, no, I don't blame her, which was interesting.
Yeah.
He didn't blame her. He blamed, told me he blamed those two people.
And yet they're still in charge of that party, it seems like. You know, you took a party that was, you know, really floundering and, you know, had just done the autopsy, you know, a couple of years earlier. And you turned it around. I know that they're not going to listen to whatever advice you give them, but what advice would you give Democrats about what they should be doing?
Well, I actually gave the Republicans advice the other day. Don't keep harping on all these incredible things that we have. Just save it for the election, you know, because you don't want them to change. A lot of people talked about inflation or the economy. I put the open border as the number one issue.
Well, let's talk about that for a minute. You have obviously, your State Department at your direction has now named, done something that I and a lot of others believed had happened a long time ago, which was name these major cartel groups as foreign terror organizations.
Which they are.
That obviously triggers a bunch of things in terms of going after their assets,
right,
et cetera. Are you going to hold to account a lot of these corrupt politicians who profited from that human trafficking, from pouring fentanyl in?
They did,
including leading Mexican.
Well, certainly, I would recommend that they be looked at. You know, certainly, it's going to be up to Pam Bondi, who's excellent at what she does. But there's been so much
action in Mexico.
There is. Well, I'd rather not tell you that.
Yeah,
because somehow
I have to ask anyway.
I'd love to tell you. That's you know, it's so interesting. Sometimes you'll be asked like a question like that, and you want to give an answer because you don't want to have somebody walk out and say, but if you give the answer, it's a disaster.
Yeah.
If you give a truthful answer.
No, it always reminds me of the SNL sketch where the guy says, "Where in the Gulf War, where are your tanks and can I go see them?"
That's right. That's right. Exactly.
By the way,
we have a lot of that.
Shane Gillis is hosting SNL this weekend. Are you a fan? You met him at the Super Bowl, I think.
Yeah.
And, are you a fan?
Well, he's a very good. I mean, on our side, right?
He definitely, yes. I profiled him when he was at his lowest point, when he had just gotten fired from SNL. I did profile him when he was playing to a club of like 50 people in Maryland.
Is Shane Gillis doing very well now?
I think he's the best.
Huh?
He's one of the top comics in the.
And he's been on
He
our
is-
side.
Yeah.
And I like him. And I like everybody that's on my side. You know, I'm just old fashioned in that way. I like those people. And we have a lot of people. We have more people than anybody understands. You know, this whole MAGA movement is.
Well, you change things culturally.
Yeah.
Everybody talks about the vibe shift, but it's very clearly a difference, a change, and that's not just people motivated by what you're doing politically, like my wife, like the Maha moms.
Right.
You know, it's also people culturally who feel they can finally say things. I remember when my father's Puerto Rican, when Tony went out there and gave that joke, that silly joke, and people were saying for the next 48 hours that was like the end. I was like, I'm not offended by that joke. I wanted to get cleaned up too. Anyway, no, it just.
He gave a. See, the sad part about that was, it turned out to be nothing. But
Yeah.
and I didn't think it was going to be much, but they made such a big deal. That was just
They were desperate at that.
They were desperate, but they took that joke. But the big thing was that I could have sold out Madison Square Garden 10 times. You were there?
No, I was not at that one.
Okay,
But
but you
I've
saw.
been at many of your other events.
You know, I had a picture. I have to show you. But I had a picture that of a stadium
Mhm.
that I did 2 weeks before in Milwaukee, and I said, "Look at this." But we've had 107,000, 111,000.
Yeah.
In Butler, we had 100,000 for the second time, 55,000 when the I get that throbbing feeling. Wait, let me
Yeah,
get this.
yeah.
Look at this. This is the average crowd. Did you see this? I'm just looking at pictures of throwing away some stuff. Of course, I have to be careful about throwing anything away. They want to put you in prison. Can you do it?
Yeah.
Well, can you know, if you write a note
Uh,
and you don't like it because it looks bad or something,
Yeah.
and if you rip it up, throw it away. This Jack Smith wanted to put you in prison. And by the way, he didn't end up so good, did he?
No, and well,
He got
we had a
punched.
little experience with him in Virginia with Bob McDonald too, that didn't end up too
He
good.
destroyed that guy.
He destroyed him.
And
No.
Bob McDonald, were you friendly with him?
Yes,
He's
very
a
much.
high
so.
quality guy.
Yeah.
Look, the
Boy
wife,
Scout.
the wife was
The
a
wife.
mess.
Yeah.
She
Very
was
sad.
a mess.
Yeah.
How he stayed with her.
Yeah. So.
I assume he eventually left, right?
Yeah, I think that they are now split.
Look at this. Look at that picture. I mean, that's serious, right?
That's phenomenal. Wow.
That's a routine crowd. Look at this. This was in New Jersey. I just see these pictures.
Well, but see, I think this is part of that vibe shift that I mentioned. You know, that
Look at this.
one thing in particular.
Look at the crowd. That's not.
One thing in particular, though, that I think sticks out to me on this is that not all of those people. I think they agree with the vast majority of what you're doing, but they also came to you through different avenues this time. The podcast election. I mean, it was just amazing to see it play out. And I remember people saying at the beginning, you know, is this risky? But I think that it's what
You mean
get
it was
there.
risky doing them?
Risky doing so many of them because
You know, it was
people-
interesting. They were all good.
Not all the politicians can do that.
They wouldn't.
you know?
Well, she didn't do it.
All the comm staff on Capitol Hill were like, you know, what is he doing going on? All these things, and I was
Because
like,
I was
you need to
reading.
know who these guys are because they've replaced the old media, they've replaced the legacy media, and they have bigger followings. When the CNN is background, okay,
Right.
when people tune into these, they are listening to them, they're watching them on YouTube on their own TVs. I watch Barstool sports content
Right.
every week on my television. You know,
Is that a hot one now? Is that a?
Yes, I mean
It's doing well.
Yeah, he's done very well, and
He's been good to me, I think. Right?
Big promo.
yeah,
Say hello to him. He's been great.
yeah.
Actually.
The question I have about that is,
By the way, Joe Rogan. So I do Joe Rogan,
yeah,
and it was 3 hours and 15 minutes, and it caused a little problem because I was doing a thing in Michigan. I started speaking at 12 in the evening, and not a person left. It would have been a room just like that. Not a person left. And I explained, hey, I just did Joe Rogan. We got to win this thing. So we actually told them, I'm doing Joe Rogan. Can you wait? Nobody left. There was unbelievable spirit. But my son, who's just 18, Baron, he goes, Dad, you got to do this one and
Yeah.
that one. And he's telling me names I never heard.
well, clearly it worked.
It
But
worked.
also,
But TikTok worked too.
well, also I want to ask you, there is a new podcaster out there, Gavin Newsom, who has decided that he's going to launch one. Do you think he'll be a good podcaster? And do you think California would be better off if he did that full time?
I don't know. Is he doing a podcast as governor?
Yes.
I don't know what to tell you on that. I mean, you never know.
Would you go on?
Sure. Look, so I did Joe Rogan, and I never even thought about not doing. She wouldn't do it, and I got 250 million people for Joe Rogan. You saw that.
Mm-hmm.
That was his biggest ever by far.
Yeah.
And he was a great.
I've been listening to him for years.
He was great.
It depends on the guest. But,
yeah, he was a great guy.
You hear a lot about the Comanche if you listen regularly enough.
He was, I guess he was a Democrat. I don't think he is anymore. But he's, and two words I mentioned common sense a lot lately, and I never heard those words used politically. I hope I brought them into the forefront, but it's really about common sense. You don't want open borders. You don't want prisons emptied out into your country. You don't want insane asylums dropped. Remember, I used to mention the name Hannibal Lecter a lot, and the press would say, "Why would he mention? That's a fictitious." The people know why. They don't want him in the country.
So I have to ask a question on my wife's behalf because, like I said, she is a Maha mom. She is very happy that RFK is in the position that he is, but she also is angry about the fact that Joe pardoned so many people, including Dr. Fauci, on the way out.
Yeah.
And she wants there to be accountability, culpability, people being held to account for the bad decisions that they made, the bad advice they gave. And that, extends, it extends all the way to China, really, in terms of the ramifications of what they unleash. But what can be done to hold these people accountable, make sure that they don't get away with this? There's so many governments, including around the world,
right,
that reopened their schools before we did, that, figured this stuff out before we did.
Yeah.
We were way behind because of all of these people, and that has a permanent effect. It's scarred a generation of kids who had to stay home. I know some of those kids who have development disorders now, who are basically nonverbal.
Yeah.
How can the politicians?
So, yeah, and a lot of this because it was so far behind even educationally. So it's very interesting. The federalist system is like you let the governor decide.
Yeah.
I let all the governors decide. I had governors that kept them open 100% of the time. South Carolina did, Tennessee did. We had a lot of them.
Yeah.
South Dakota, she did a good job. Many. The Democrats were the ones that did it, and they kept it going very long after I was gone. I was gone long, and everything was closed, and it was ridiculous. But I had many that were open that were Republicans. Some of the Republicans did a good job. I don't think any of the Democrats did a good job. They all kept it close.
Yeah. And they paid the price for it, I think, in this election.
I think they did. They paid it here.
Yeah.
I love this cover, brother.
Yeah.
So
I was going to ask you to sign it for me at the end.
That's it. You want me to what?
I was going to ask you to sign it for me.
Oh, I will do, sure. Can I have one for my wife?
Yes, absolutely.
I'd love that. Yeah.
So, who actually left the cocaine in the White House?
Who? What?
Who left the cocaine in the White House?
Oh. Well, either Joe or Hunter. Could be Joe, too. Okay. So that was such a terrible thing because, those bins are very loaded up with, they're not clean.
Mm-hmm.
And they have hundreds and even thousands of fingerprints. And when they went to look at it, it was absolutely stone cold wiped dry. You know that, right?
See, well, because when I was a Bush, I was briefly, a Bush speechwriter and staff, person, and so I knew exactly what they were talking about, and I was like, those things are filthy.
They're filthy, and there were fingerprints. If you went to one, maybe we're cleaner, but if you went to one at any time, you would see hundreds. Everybody in there would leave a finger.
Yeah.
When they went in, that thing was wiped out with the strongest form of alcohol.
That's hilarious. Well, not hilarious.
By the way,
sad.
And I have to tell you, I think I'm going to look into that because it was bad stuff happened there.
One of the things that came out, has obviously come out is the work that was done via the Aspen Institute and the Intel community to basically queue up, hey, there's going to be something that comes out late, and it's going to be related to probably Hunter and money from overseas, and it's going to be a Russian op. And some of the funding for that, of course,
They're
they
sick.
found via Doge.
Yeah.
Thank you for letting Doge out.
By the way, how good is that?
Well,
Do you see where Stacey Abrams got $2 billion?
oh my gosh.
Can
well,
you imagine?
Look, I've lived in this area around the swamp for almost 2 decades. And like I said, the fear that is among the bureaucratic class right now of being exposed for how little work they do.
But you didn't know it was this crooked.
Oh, no. I mean, and I
How
also...
about the newly formed corporation, Environmental Protection, Lee Zeldin? $20 billion put in. $20 billion.
The
And people
audacity
don't
of
know.
this.
People don't know what that is. They think it's 20,000.
Yeah.
They don't know. You can't explain $20 billion.
Yeah.
That's massive money.
Mhm.
That's $20 billion was put in, and they think it could be 60.
Yeah.
The numbers are staggering.
The funny thing about government, and when people start talking about taxpayer money being wasted, is they always talk about it in percentages. They always, oh, it's only 1%. 1% is a lot of money, okay, and it's a lot more than 1%. And then you add it up and add it up.
They think they think it's going to be close to $1 trillion, huh? And that's pretty good stuff. You know, when
is it more important for you to use that to balance the budget than to do other things?
Well,
Whatever comes.
I think a
even if
big
it's-
sleeper is going to be this gold card. You know, it's an idea I had. I think this could be a very big sleeper. Do you know?
Yeah.
If you sell, let's say, 1 million at 5 million, that's $5 trillion. The budget's almost going to be balanced. You know, it's not going to be that far short. It's going to make $5 trillion. That's part of, that's part of the.
How do you ensure that that's something that doesn't get exploited
Well,
by the wrong people?
It's so simple. You know, the other stuff, the different programs, you put money in and you can build a building and you get a mortgage and this and that. Oh, yeah, you can imagine what's going on. I think we're going to terminate the program. They say it's just so terrible. This is very simple. 5 million and you have a path to citizenship. You essentially get a green card plus.
Mm-hmm.
It's a green card plus. It's a gold card. And you have a play. If we did 1 million, it's a lot. Now, if we did 10 million, it's $50 trillion. 10 million, you know, if that thing exploded, you have people that would pay that.
Yeah.
I have people all the time begging me to help them get into the country. Some of them are very wealthy people. They'd pay that in 2 minutes.
Are you surprised by how quickly your policy impacted? I've known Bill Melugin for a long time. I've been to Eagle Pass many times. Are you surprised by how quickly your policies impacted the border?
You mean that
just
in
completely
a
shut
couple
it
of
down
weeks?
in the space of weeks?
Because I did it before. But now there was more focus, a little bit more focus on it, but I did it before. Remember the chart that I turned on the right?
Yeah.
Hey, can you get me that chart? I mean, you've seen it 1,000
Yeah,
times.
I've seen it, yeah.
That's my all-time favorite chart. But
Well,
no, if I didn't turn right, that's it. There was nobody over there. There had 55,000 people here. I'm not looking to the right. I looked to the right because the chart was coming down off a crane or something. But it was a good chart. Sure that.
There we go.
So the arrow on the bottom,
Yeah.
that was my last week in office. You saw the.
She's printing something for me. I'm so honored.
They do. These two do a good job. Look at that one back there. She's done a great job.
No, I just
And,
knew her.
and by
as
the
a
way,
printer
she's.
girl or
How do you
whatever.
like the job that our new superstar is doing? What do you think?
Oh, I think she's fantastic. I think, well, look, I've been around. The first press secretary that I met was Tony Snow,
Right?
because he ran the White House Bible study actually when I was here.
Did he
In-
die or is he still?
Yes, he passed away.
He died.
And
And he was pretty good, right?
he was quite good, but he was very nice, but he was very firm with people. He was very, and what I like about you is you never really seem to get as angry when you're doing it. It's almost like you enjoy it, and
Yes.
it's an
Oh,
enjoyable
I think she loves
combat.
I
And
do.
that's I think really important because not everybody. Some people they just get angry. You know, I still make fun of Sean Spicer for getting angry at me on the phone once when I was warning him that having John Harwood moderate a debate. All of you remember that one, all the way back in.
Was he
2016,
the worst, John?
CNBC.
Was John
I
Harwood?
was. We got into a yelling match because I was saying, Sean, he's going to ruin this debate. And then the first question he asks you is, "Are you a comic book villain?"
Right. That's right. Remember that?
Yeah.
He was so bad. It actually was good for me. You know.
Yeah. No, it
to
worked
be
out.
honest.
It worked out.
It worked out good, but he was a bad guy. He was almost like a counter spy. I think she's going to be amazing. So far, she's.
Happy Warriors are the best when it comes
Yeah,
to the press
she's
because they
she's
get
doing
frustrated with it. Yeah, and
But look at that. So if you look at that era,
Yeah.
that's when I left.
yeah.
Look what happened after I left. Like
So-
a rocket.
Are you?
But you have to say it's impressive
Yeah,
what they've done. The
Remain-
border is essentially closed.
Remain is obviously not a long-term solution. It was an immediate kind of solution in your first term. What do you view as the long-term solution to make sure that Mexico handles this problem?
I would rather not tell you that.
Okay.
You know why?
Okay.
Because you know what the only solution is.
Yeah. So one last question. The Philadelphia Eagles,
Right?
you said you were going to invite them.
Yeah,
They're
they're
going to
here.
come.
They're invited.
That's part of the vibe shift I was talking about.
Oh,
So fans of the NFL right now, I don't know if you're familiar with this because you watched the game, but
no.
there's been this whole debate about the main play that they run, the tush push.
Oh, yeah,
Are
right.
you familiar with
Right.
this? Yes.
Right.
So they're debating whether they should ban it or not. One side says ban it; it's an almost unstoppable play. The other side says, so you got to stop
Yeah.
it. Which side are you on?
I wouldn't ban it, but what I would ban is this horrible kickoff rule, this new kickoff rule.
Yeah,
That is so bad.
it's a weird rule.
It is so
just
bad.
Looks
The-
weird.
The ball, it's first of all, it's the opposite of football. Second of all, it's actually more dangerous because you're actually
Yeah.
going into each other without any
Mhm.
defense or anything. It's much more dangerous. It is so terrible. You know, in football, when the ball moves, you're supposed to be moving.
Yeah,
This ball is up in the air, and they're all standing. It is so horrible to watch that. And I told that to Roger Goodell.
I know you're such a huge fan. I collect old USFL stuff.
Oh,
in
that's
fact. And I'm just curious, do you think the game is better now than it ever has been, or is there something that changed?
Well, look, they got big ratings on the Super Bowl. Right?
Yep.
It should have. I mean, it was not a good game, but it was a good game if you like.
I was there in Philadelphia as a Washington fan for the NFC Championship, and
Right.
that game was actually more competitive.
Unbelievable. And how good is the quarterback, right?
He
Boy, when you can draft a young quarterback, but it's like gold. You take a guy who's great in college and he turns out to be no good. And then you'll take somebody like in San Francisco, that kid.
Yeah,
He was the last draft choice. He
Yeah.
wasn't Brady. He was 6 runs back.
yeah,
He was literally the last guy in the draft, and
Mr. Irrelevant.
he moves the
becomes-
ball,
yeah,
right? You
yeah.
know, it's one of those things. They're coming here. What I'm doing, Philadelphia's
Yeah.
coming here, and Kansas City,
Mhm.
when they won the Super Bowl during COVID, you couldn't have them here. You
Yeah.
virtually couldn't
Yeah.
have it. It was too bad. And I said, you know what? I should really invite them for that. And I told them they want to come. By the way,
Yes, sir. We're
they
working
really
on
want
it.
to come.
They do.
You know
We're
who came?
gonna
The
do it
kicker
today.
came today. He's a
That's great.
Trump fan. He's a nice guy, great kicker. And he came. But he said, yeah, we missed it because of the COVID. I said, well, let's do it.
He's a
So
great
we're going to
kicker.
have Philadelphia. When is Philadelphia coming?
I believe next month, the end of April.
If you want to come, come.
There-
I would-
it's-
I would-
Are you a fan? Are you a Philadelphia fan?
No, I am a Washington fan, but
You can still come.
but
So how good is the Washington quarterback?
Jaden Daniels is incredible. I hope that one of the things you can build here while you're here in the next 4 years is
Say it.
even if whatever it takes. I mean, if it takes giving DC back to Maryland, to get rid of Bowser or something like that. But the fact that they could maybe play at RFK again with this quarterback in my lifetime, I mean,
So locationally, you love what? Not the stadium. You would rip down the stadium,
rip down the stadium, build a new stadium.
but you love that location.
I think that location.
It's so beautiful when you're
It
driving
is
up.
beautiful, but it needs so much investment. But it could be as good as what is around Navy Yard and Nats Park and everything that we see over there.
The site is great.
The
right?
site is great, but it needs a lot more.
Does that have train service?
Near it, yes.
It has train service.
Yeah, the metro.
What I love is you drive it up and it's it splits the road.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
And okay, now you're not talking about keeping the stadium.
No, get rid
You're
of the
talking
stadium,
about-
build a
In
new
other words,
stadium.
you'd like to have it built in Washington.
I would like it to be built on that
So
site.
should I take over the government of DC?
if that's the outcome, not only would I be in favor of it, but virtually every Washington fan would be in favor of it.
And most people that live in Washington.
Oh yeah. Oh,
It's
they
so
want the investment. They want.
sad.
It's a pathetic fact that it's not there. And
Well,
it's-
we're trying to do it.
Yeah.
We're trying to do it. We're looking at doing it.
Josh Harris, the owner,
It's so
clearly
bad.
wants to do it. So,
He's a nice guy, by the way,
Yeah.
the owner. I met him. You know, I went to a game. That kid was really good.
Oh, yeah.
Wasn't he second draft pick?
He was.
And
He
who
was.
was first?
So the first draft pick, Caleb Williams, is in Chicago, but the reason that he wasn't good was not his fault. It's that he had a terrible coach and a terrible offense.
But do you think could he be as good as Daniels?
I don't think so. I think Daniels is a generational.
He was just a natural man. The way he
He's
flicked.
so calm. It's like he was built for this. And part of this too, keep in mind, is because of COVID, these guys, and the same with the quarterback out in Denver, Domenech, they got extra years and extra
So how good
games.
is Nix?
Nix is very good.
Isn't he like 25 or 26?
Yeah.
That was
He's-
unusual.
So it's very unusual, but the point is they got like 5 seasons of starting, and that made a huge difference. And
Will is Nix as good as this Daniels?
no, I don't think so.
You don't think-
not physically as good,
Almost nobody is.
but it's I mean
The guy
I don't
from
know what
Texas, how about him? He might be better.
We'll have to see.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, we'll have to see.
How about you gave him up for the number one guy in Alabama who's very little and who
Yeah,
is not making it?
yeah, no, I don't think so.
They took him second,
Yeah.
Sprague or whatever his
Yeah.
name is.
No,
It's interesting.
Arch Manning, the thing about Arch Manning is people will be disappointed on any pass when he doesn't throw a touchdown.
How good is he? Well, I was talking about Texas in the NFL.
Oh,
The quarterback.
you mean C.J. Stroud in
Stroud.
Houston? Yeah.
How good is he?
Well, he had an excellent first season, but then the second season he took a step back.
So would you
Then-
take Daniels then over him?
I would, because
Oh, wow.
in part because Daniels is just he can do everything in terms of the physical capability of movement, and the other thing is this was not a very good team.
So what about the owner? He sells the team. He did great. He got $6 billion.
Yeah.
And he's always been nice to me. He always
And yeah, and
supported
then he
me.
did the whole movie thing.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
He did fine. He did. Look, he made a lot of money with the team.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's good. But the team didn't work. But he sells the team, and they end up with Daniels as a quarterback. Would he have had Daniels as a quarterback? Probably.
Oh, he certainly would.
Did
have.
his guys make the pick?
No, there was a whole new crew of general
so it might
manager
not have
and
been
everything,
Daniels.
So he might not have done that. He might have botched that.
No, because all those years he fought he tried so hard.
We had a brief glimpse of it with RG3, and I was at the game where his knee
Who was
blew up.
great until he got hit about
Yeah.
15 times.
Yeah, but he was nowhere near as skilled as this guy in terms of throwing the ball.
Really? And is this guy tall?
Yes, but he's very lean. One of the reasons he went second is because he's very skinny, and the other quarterback who went before him, Caleb Williams, is more built like a normal.
So you're a real fan, huh? That's great.
Oh yeah, some of my earliest memories are my earliest memory is actually the Reagan Challenger speech.
And you'd like to see the stadium built here?
I would, 100%.
All right, good.
Yeah.
Because, the DC takeover, right? We're working on that, right?
You gotta clean up the city.
The
You
mayor,
have to. You have to.
The
You can't-
tents-
You can't do it without cleaning up the city.
and it was great 10 years ago, right?
Yeah, it really was. It
was good during my
fine.
administration.
Yeah.
But the crime, look,
And then
these are incompetent people,
yes, deep.
like her, how about the guy in Chicago?
Oh my gosh, 7% of
He's worse than the
Who was
one
the
from
7%?
before,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
He was now he's at 4%. They had some.
Oh really?
And yet he'll beat some people. Do you understand that? Can you
Corruption.
believe it?
Corruption.
He'll beat some people. So you'd like to see that.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll do that.
Okay.
I mean, I'm pretty busy,
Yeah, you got some other things on your plate.
but one little difference is they wanted to come mostly. Many of them really wanted to come. But a couple of teams that canceled would have never canceled now.
Yeah,
You
no, I don't
understand?
think anybody would cancel.
But when I heard like San Francisco basketball team, Curry, I heard a little rumor like they're going to take a vote. When I heard take a vote, that means no good. So I said, you don't have to take a vote because you're no longer invited. Do not come under any circumstance. And it was cool. People said, that's the coolest thing. They never got to take a vote
Yeah.
because I could see the writing on the wall. Now it's much different.
Yeah.
It's much different. I think it's all those guys are in love with Trump, and they all hated Trump. They would go through fire to destroy me. Now it doesn't mean you say will they be low? Who knows?
Yeah.
But when I was a winner at the beginning, then that was a big win. They didn't come with me. When I was a winner now, they're at levels. Nobody's ever seen a dais like that. The inauguration.
Yeah.
Zuckerberg, this one, that one, Microsoft, everybody.
Why does Britain seem to be in an energy perma-crisis? Freddy Gray spoke to energy expert and author Robert Bryce about how government has only made things worse.
Today I am delighted to be joined by Robert Bryce, a friend of the show. As we say here, the Bryce is right.
At Spectator World headquarters.
Spectator World. He is the author of The Question of Power, Electricity and the Wealth of Nations, and the author of a brilliant Substack, which I recommend all Americano viewers and listeners subscribe to immediately.
Absolutely.
And it's great to have you here in London because the last time we spoke, you were in America. What was down?
Yeah, I think we've only Zoomed before or done online before. We haven't done anything live, but this is great.
Let's talk about your latest. Let's start by talking about your latest Substack post, which I thought was very interesting, about Ford.
Yeah.
And EVs and
Right.
the incredible losses, 17 billion.
Well, so by the end of this year, when you tally all the losses that Ford will have accumulated, because they're projecting another $5 billion loss on electric vehicles this year, they will have lost $17 billion since 2023, 2022. It's just an staggering loss. And I think one of the biggest corporate misallocations of capital and misreadings of the marketplace of anything I can recall. And they're losing now, I think, for all of 2024, I think they lost an average of $50,000 for every EV they sold. And they didn't make it up in volume, right? I mean, it's incredible. But it's not just Ford, I will say. What's interesting about Ford is they break out their EV segment from the rest of their reporting, right? So it's very clear they report that separately, and they report their operating losses for the EV segment. The other automakers don't. But we see all across the automotive space, the EV part of their business, all of them are cutting back. All of them are realizing they're not selling, and all of them are taking massive losses. So, some of this was government push saying you have to do this, but the other part of it, though, was just these automakers investing billions without understanding that their customers really don't want these. I mean, there are a few, there are, maybe 10%, 12%, but overwhelming majority don't.
And to what extent was it government push and to what extent was it government carrot in terms of subsidies? And I mean, they lost 17 billion, but how much did they get government money to do it? Did they get federal funds to do it?
Well, of course. I mean,
Yeah.
yes. I mean, I'm of this old mind that corporations don't need government subsidies, but, of course, subsidies and the subsidies and the mandates went together. So Ford, and the other automakers, GM and Stellantis, and then a bunch of foreign automakers came to the U.S. because they got tax credits or loan guarantees or other things that incentivized them in particular to build battery plants. But a lot of that is unraveling now. Part of it is higher interest rates, but also you've got here in Europe and the UK, you've got the reality of Chinese imports and electric vehicles eating into the marketplace, and also higher interest rates and consumers are just and inflation, and consumers are cutting back. So what we see in the U.S. overall, just one last point, the age of the overall car fleet in America is the oldest it's ever been. People are keeping their cars longer. They're not buying. I live in Austin, Texas, so you have to have a car, right? Not like in London, but we have 3 cars, and they're all 12 years old or older.
Yeah.
I don't want a new car right now, but I could afford one, but I'm not going to buy one.
Well, I mean, EVs is a big story in Britain.
Oh, yeah.
Too, and there's been this huge push towards them, a growth of charging stations and so on, a lot of people buying through company schemes and so on.
Sure.
And it felt about 3 years ago as though we were approaching a sort of tipping point where EVs were going to become the norm. I think that slid back a little bit because consumers don't really like them that much overall, I think. But then when you take the American mindset on cars, cars are very fundamental to America in many ways, and to the American story.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Well, and we have, in the U.S., we have nearly as many automobiles as we have people. Yeah. We have 330 million people. We have about 285 or 286 million motor vehicles. And of that, I'd say, I'm just guessing off the top of my head, 98, 99% run on liquid motor fuel, run on petroleum. But I just thinking about where we are. So we're here in central London, and we're staying at a hotel over near Trafalgar. We walked over here, and it's not that far. I didn't pass a single EV charging station. So residents of this part of central London, if they had an EV, where are they going to charge it? Yeah. They live in a low-rise apartment building, or flats as you call them here. But where are they going to charge it? So
maybe that's very discreetly designed, and it's hard to spot.
Yeah, well, that may well be, but still, this is a big problem of that infrastructure. And the way I think about it, I've written about the history of the automotive business a little bit. There's nothing new about the electric vehicle. They were around in Edison's day, and Edison and Ford, and Edison eventually realized this isn't going to work, right? Because the energy density of batteries is so low relative to that of gasoline, jet fuel, diesel fuel. And as I put it, if oil didn't exist, we'd have to invent it. It's just a nearly miraculous it is a miraculous substance. Yes. Because of its energy density, cost, weight, ease of handling at a standard temperature and pressure. It's and the final point on that is we forget this massive amount of energy that we consume in the form of liquid fuel. And the idea that we could somehow supplant that or easily switch away from that over to electricity, I think overall it's just a fool's errand.
We talked about government push and pull incentives and so on. Of course, the big change now is you have a Trump administration that appears to be jettisoning.
It is a big change.
It is a big change.
There is no doubt about that.
But there's a lot of interest in the extent to which the Trump administration will unravel a lot of the Green New Deal incentives that Biden put in place. What's your latest take on what's going on there? What is going to be cut? What is going to be kept? And so on.
Well, let me just first say, this is the biggest U-turn in politics, particularly on the energy side of politics in American history, and there's no second place. It's just, frankly, the fraud and the waste that was happening in energy policy in the Biden administration, the numbers of contracts that were given to favored NGOs like Rocky Mountain Institute, and now a new discovery of a massive grant going to an outfit called Rewiring America to electrify everything, and this was their push. And they were getting government money. And these are the climate alarmists that are effectively planting themselves inside the government of the Biden administration with full cooperation of the EPA and the Department of Energy under Joe Biden. That's all going to be unraveled. But so what's going to happen in the U.S.? We're going to see a sea change, clearly, in terms of energy policy. The Democrats are back-footed in almost every way. They don't have an heir apparent. JD is the obvious heir apparent in the U.S., but I think it's more important than what is happening in the U.S. because, in my view, you look around the world and the election of Trump has had these knock-on effects that are serious. The German coalition government fell 2 days after Trump was elected. And then you've seen the coalition government in Norway, the coalition government in Canada, all fall apart. Now, that's not all Trump, but I think there are multiple factors, Trump being a key one, that have resulted in this move away from climatism and more toward energy realism. And I think it's long overdue. Unfortunately, I think we will, by the time we get a full course correction, consumers and taxpayers will have been forced to waste trillions of dollars.
And the extension of energy realism is what you call energy humanism.
Right.
And you've been here in London giving a talk about that this week. You did talk about this the last time we had you on, but just explain again what you see energy humanism as being.
Sure.
And why is it a sort of essential thing to understand?
Sure. Well, a fellow writer on Doomberg puts it very clearly. He says energy is life, and the absence of energy is death. And I spoke at the ARC conference a couple of days ago, and I told this story of meeting a woman in rural India about 8 years ago. And in talking to her, her name was Rohena Jamadar, and she lived in this small agricultural village in West Bengal called Majlishpukur. And she lived almost all of her life without electricity. And it was a conversation, and I told the audience, I said, it really did change the course of my life, change the course of my career, how I think about energy and energy poverty. But it was talking to her, and she was She had her first child when she was 16. She was in her mid-40s, and one of her daughters was going to the university in Kolkata, and she was clearly proud of this. And so we talked a bit more, and then I asked her through my friend Joya Shri Roy, who was translating. I said, well, if you had had electricity when you were young, would you have gone to the university as well? And she immediately nodded and said, yes, I would have gone. And so, you know how it is. You meet people, you think about it, conversations, and a couple of days later, you realize, well, what did this mean? And it came to me a couple of days later when we were in a hotel, and I've had a few minutes to myself. And darkness kills human potential, and electricity nourishes it. And here was a woman who'd seen this opportunity pass her by, and she was clearly very intelligent and could have gone to the university, could have been a doctor, lawyer, you know, who knows, a teacher, a nurse, you know, I don't know. But having cheap, abundant, reliable electricity, having high quality energy is absolutely essential to human development and human flourishing. And so I hesitate to get too theological or philosophical here. Well, no, I don't. Wait, who am I? Wait, stop. No, we're made in the image of God. We have this culture, this ability to create. And if we don't have sufficient energy, we can't do that. We can't fulfill our God-given potential, our creativity, our ability to grow and flourish as humans and reach our full potential is quashed if we're living in energy poverty.
No, we always go philosophical. We like it. We like it a lot. More the better, we say.
Well, bring it on. I don't know.
More energy.
Have we mentioned Kierkegaard? I don't know. Kierkegaard, who did say, I never had a problem that I couldn't resolve with a good walk. I would kind of like that.
Yeah, well, that's energetic.
I don't quote Kierkegaard often, but that's the only Kierkegaard I know.
But you are glad then that I think you can call him, he's a friend of yours, Chris Wright, the Energy Secretary, is very much on board with this message, with this radical rethinking of the way we think about energy and electricity. And the administration is taking this all of the above approach to energy. So if renewables work, do it. If we need to drill more, do it. There's going to be a big we are in the middle of a big technological revolution, which will require ever greater amounts of energy, greater amounts of electricity, and America needs to provide it cheaply.
Sure. And this is where, I hope we can talk a little bit about Britain, but your Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, saying, Britain's going to lead in AI. And I'm over here I live in Texas. I'm from Oklahoma, not bragging about Texas. I'm thinking, what is he smoking? I mean, is there some kind of, marijuana gummies he's having? How is, Britain is facing this oblivion, truly, when it comes to energy availability, particularly cheap electricity. But back to Chris Wright. I'm just a quick side note there. But yes, I have tremendous respect for Chris. I've known him for a long time. He's an entrepreneur. He's has a technical mind. He knows every part of the energy business. He's been a very successful head of a CEO of a company, Liberty Energy, which is publicly traded, Denver-based hydraulic fracturing company. But as I wrote about when Trump named him as the nominee, I said that he's an unapologetic energy humanist. And finally, we have someone who will be in that job who isn't demonizing energy. And, his predecessor, Jennifer Granholm, she was a Harvard lawyer. It was a political appointment that she had no real deep knowledge. Chris has incredibly deep knowledge. And so he's not only an energy humanist, but I think he's the first person that has ever been in that job as energy secretary to come directly out of the energy industry. Ronald Reagan appointed a dentist. I mean, it's been up till now having actual qualifications and a history in the energy business has been disqualifying for that job. So I'm very excited about that. Now, to be clear, can Chris change a lot and do it in a short time? We will see. But I think the areas where he's going to push hardest are on baseload power and in bolstering the U.S. electric grid, because even though we are in a very good position in the U.S., we're going to need a lot more electricity for AI, for data centers, and economic growth. But I think the thing to watch is going to be the nuclear sector and how quickly the Department of Energy and the rest of the federal government can catalyze growth in new reactor designs and deployment.
And there's a strategic element to it too, because the Trump administration is has its eyes very much on China.
Yeah.
And the rise of China. And we have a fascinating piece in The Spectator this week about China and climate change groups in Britain.
Yeah.
And that China is actually a sort of the funder and the
yeah.
pusher of a lot of climate change
Sure.
rhetoric, anti-climate change
And the
rhetoric.
Russians were behind the anti-fracking movement in Europe.
Well, quite. Yes, they were. Russia Today, the TV channel, did regular sections on fracking, which seemed a bit odd, but then when you think about it, it's not odd at all. They didn't want fracking to happen because at the time, Russian oil and gas was very important to Europe and Britain.
Right. So I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I think Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone, although the new CIA is finally going to release some
soon find
papers
out.
on the Kennedy assassination. But I think it's very clear that, and I had some knowledge of the Chinese support for climate groups, but I look forward to reading a piece. But it's very clear, and Matt Ridley and others have written about these connections between the anti-fracking groups in Europe and the Russians. And of course, the Russians don't want to have Europe producing its own gas. They wanted Europe to, and many countries in Europe to remain dependent on Gazprom. And so now here we are, however many years later, we're all these years deep into the Ukraine war, and Europe is in the hurt locker, and overall, because it became too dependent on Russian gas. And now, without Russian gas, pipeline gas, which was your cheapest form of available gas, you're having to rely on imported LNG. And I just looked at the price of TTF, which is the Dutch trading hub. It's $14.59 per million BTUs. At Henry Hub in the U.S., it's $4.34. So you're paying, almost 4 times as much. That's almost as much as you're paying actually more now than the Asian LNG price, the JKM, which is $14.25.
Yes, and in Britain we worry a lot about growth. It's become this sort of unicorn thing, economic growth. Politicians talk about it all the time, talk about how we can possibly achieve it, but it doesn't seem to happen. Probably the most important thing to growth is cheap energy.
Absolutely. Full stop.
Yeah.
And when you started to talk about that, I was saying, but you can't have economic growth if you don't have cheap, abundant, reliable energy.
Yeah.
Both for, and particularly in the form of natural gas, but also, making certain that you have cheap, abundant, reliable electricity. And so I've watched now, and Matt Ridley and many others have written about it at the ARC conference. Paul Marshall mentioned it, who, I understand now owns the Spectator.
Yes.
But Britain now has the highest electricity prices in the developed world. This is nothing to brag about, my friend.
No.
This is nothing to brag about.
No.
You're paying, 40 cents a kilowatt hour. In Texas, I'm paying 13. So you have and Paul Marshall at the ARC conference, I think, I'm remembering off the top of my head, I think he said that now industrial electricity prices in Britain are 5 times the U.S. and 7 times China. How can you have a thriving industry if your costs are that high? And the other he also quoted, and I looked it up just again this morning. Paul Marshall quoted the CEO or the head of INEOS, your chemical company, Sir Jim Ratcliffe. He said recently that the UK chemical industry is facing extinction. Well, if you don't have basic chemicals, that's the basis of industry. And remember, INEOS just in January closed the Grangemouth ethanol plant in Scotland, the last synthetic ethanol plant in Europe. Yes. So Europe is in a very precarious, and does Britain consider itself still part of Europe, or we have to think about this differently here?
No, we're not part of the European Union. But
no, I'm not part of the European Union.
All the advantages that a lot of Brexiteers thought would come from Brexit and not being tied to the European Union, sort of the opposite has happened.
Yeah.
On energy, on immigration.
And the opposite happened. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting. I'm sorry.
Well, we thought that we'd get more control of our borders with Brexit, but the opposite seemed to happen.
I see.
And then we thought we would have more say over energy policy, less interference from Europe and so on. And in fact, we've become more zealous for net zero. And that was under a Conservative government, and now we have a Labour government, which is worse. But anyway,
and how do you
it's supposed to be the Americana show. But
how do you explain that? Because I've watched. I mean, Liz Truss was in office. She had a cup of coffee and then was out. Right, 6 or 7 weeks.
Yeah.
Right, but when she came in, and I thought, watching from the U.S. as a Tory, I thought one of the first things she said is, "We're going to end this ban on fracking." And then they push her. They throw her overboard, and Rishi Sunak said, "Oh no, we don't want fracking." And so my understanding is that the Tories, who were in theory, the Conservatives pro-growth, they're following the Labour lead on this, what I think is just insane energy policy.
Well, I mean, there is no good explanation for it other than the fact our political elite seems to be extremely destructive and probably corrupt and
divorced
disastrous.
from the
disastrous.
Divorced from the working class.
Exactly.
Right, and no connection to it because you've also closed I think the steelworks at Port Talbot. You're closing your last blast furnace. I don't know if it's already closed or not, but that's your last ability to make virgin steel in Britain. I mean, what?
Yeah.
I look at it and I think, how can this be that you see this country that has such a proud history in industry and steelmaking, one of the cradles of the Industrial Revolution, and now instead of seeing the error and pivoting, it's like the government is pressing on the gas pedal, as we call it, the accelerator.
Well, I mean, I'd love to talk about how gloomy things are in Britain. It's what I do most all day long. But this is supposed to be the Americana show.
Oh, right, Americana, right, yes,
but,
of course.
I think let's talk a little bit about not just America, but globally, the environmentalist movement now.
Yeah.
It feels like the advent of Trump is a big defeat for them, which it is.
Oh, absolutely.
And there's a very compelling, almost indisputable logic to what you're saying. I wonder where you think environmentalism will go. We're seeing increasingly with Extinction Rebellion and groups like that more radical activism.
Yeah.
And there are theories that we will sort of soon see eco-terrorism. And I wondered if under a Trump administration that might actually be a more live danger.
Yeah. Let me just offer one quick other. I was going to interrupt you there, but I thought that you finished. So one of the other things that Paul Marshall said, and I guess he'd been talking with his Sir Jim Ratcliffe, that INEOS is going to move a lot of its operations out of Britain and into the U.S. Yeah. So as I'm a complete homer when it comes to the U.S. I'm like, I'm very proud to be American. I'm long U.S. I think we're still in an incredibly advantageous situation, demographics, geography. But because of cheap energy, we're going to see an influx of more and more industry from Europe because we have the rule of law, we have cheap energy, we have a reasonably good workforce. So what Britain's loss is going to be America's gain. And I say that with no pleasure being here because I love London, but I think this is obvious. But to your question, I've watched these NGOs for a long time. I don't call them environmental groups; they're activist groups. They're climate groups. I don't use the term fossil fuels. They're hydrocarbons, right? I don't use renewable or clean energy. It's alternative energy, right? The terms matter. But these NGOs, it is very clear, and you listen to what they are saying, and it makes perfect sense from a political standpoint. They know that they can't. They're not going to get traction in Washington now under Trump. So what are they doing? They're going to state and local levels to push climate policy. This is obvious, and they've said it very clearly. But they have also made clear, and Extinction Rebellion, some of these other ones, they are going to do, just as you said, more of this. I think of them as kind of a public terrorists. I mean, in terms of what they're doing to disrupt the public sphere, blocking roads, defacing public monuments, Stonehenge. I mean, these egotistical think they are.
Yeah.
That they have the license to go and be destroyers of the current culture. I'm just thinking, who do you think you are that you have but the self-righteousness that they have and the blinders that they have and their at ways they're attacking these Van Gogh paintings. We're going to go to the National Gallery, I think, later today, and see the painting that they threw the soup on. But I mean, there's a whole other philosophical part of this that we could get into about what is motivating this nihilistic outlook among these youngsters. I have children there that that age or a little younger, or that my kids would be older than some of these activists, but. What kind of a world outlook? How hopeless are they that they're doing this truly insane kind of public acts? And I think one of them from Extinction Rebellion was sentenced to 7 years in prison for blocking a road. The two women who threw the soup on the Van Gogh painting, I think they're in prison for 2 years. I hope they like it there.
Well, they are. If those groups do increasingly behave as terrorist groups, cells, the reaction against them, public reaction against them, will be pretty strong. So that raises an interesting question: what do the Democrats or perhaps the Labour Party do here, or the Green Party do here, do they cheerlead for increasingly radical and disruptive people, or do they try and come up with their own sensible response to, let's just talk about the Democrats, their own sensible response to the Trump administration?
Yeah, did you say sensible and Democrats? I'm in the same sentence there. I think you said.
Yeah. They are okay. Some Democrats are okay.
No, fair enough. Look, and my politics. I don't consider myself Republican or Democrat. I'm disgusted. Okay, so I've been a reporter for a long time, but right now I see the Democrats in complete disarray. Right, they don't have a logical candidate for president in 2028. They are now completely backfooted on nearly every front by Trump. And, are some of the things, as I'm watching it, what Trump is doing, do they make sense and are long overdue? Yes. Are some of these things he said, some of the things he said about Ukraine, I'm thinking, he is a total lunatic, but there are parts of what he's doing that I could kiss the guy, right? On offshore wind, for instance, putting the, and ending a lot of this and saying out loud what I've known for years, because I've followed it for 15 years, that rural Americans don't want big solar and wind projects in their neighborhoods, right? And all these solar panels are made in China. And so, the fact that he would say that out loud, and the fact that Chris Wright would the other day label net zero as sinister. I mean, it really is a new time. So it's going to take a while for the Democrats to formulate some kind of effective opposition, but to be effective, they're going to have to recraft their entire energy message, because without rural Americans, they can't win the White House. And their hold in rural America, I published a map the other day on my Substack, robertbryce.substack.com, showing there are nearly 2,600 out of the 3,100 counties in America voted for Trump. I mean, you look at any kind of geographical distribution of his voters, and overwhelmingly, United States is, Trump country, right? And in Oklahoma, he didn't win a single. Harris didn't win a single county. I'm from Oklahoma, right? So it's a sea of red.
Well, Robert Bryce, we'll end it there. But thank you so much for coming to The Spectator. It's a great, great pleasure to have you in the office. It's
fantastic to be with you, Freddie.
Also on the show this week, footage from the live Coffee House Shots podcast in Westminster earlier this week with Michael Gove, Katie Balls, Kate Andrews, and the politicians Robert Jenrick and Jonathan Ashworth.
Now, where to start? I suppose often we try and test the temperature in the room. So just to get a sense of where we are, nearly 6 months into Labour government, who thinks the government is doing well? Okay. I'm looking. Who thinks the Tory party and the new leader of the opposition, or newish leader, Kemi Badenoch, is doing well? Okay. Okay, I see a couple of hands. Not many. And who thinks that Nigel Farage, the leader of the Reform Party, is doing well? Okay, so that so far is the biggest support base. Now, we're speaking tonight just as Keir Starmer heads to Washington for his first meeting with Donald Trump. Michael, given you are I think the only person on this panel, on this podcast, who's actually met and interviewed Donald Trump before, can you give us a sense of what Keir Starmer has awaiting him?
Donald Trump is unlike any other human being on the planet. It's almost as though he is another species. It's almost as though he's evolved, or perhaps regressed, to a level of alpha primate authority, which means, as Emmanuel Macron found out earlier this week, that when you shake his hand, you find that your arm may be wrenched out of its socket, because Donald Trump wants to demonstrate that he is not just the most powerful man in the world, but someone who has to assert that power in every interaction. So for our Prime Minister, a man of naturally, how can one best put this, stoical demeanour, it will be a challenge. On the upside, Donald Trump likes to charm people. As I mentioned to Jonathan earlier, when I went in to interview him with a German colleague, Kai Diekmann, Donald Trump turned to us. He'd just been elected president, but not yet inaugurated. He looked at my German colleague and me, and he said, "Who are these two good-looking guys?" It's the only time that phrase has ever been attached to my name. So he wants to win you over, but it's also on his terms. And I discovered that when we were interviewing him, each question was merely a prelude to him saying what he wanted to say in a stream of consciousness which took in his golf courses, how beautiful Mar-a-Lago was, and also how much he hated the Germans.
So, how did the German journalist take
yes,
this?
Yeah, quite. That was the reason why a German journalist was there, so he could get the message direct. So I think that for our Prime Minister, it will be an endurance trial, and not that he would ever take any advice from me, but I think the best thing to do would be to smile, allow the President to do most of the talking, take every compliment you can, and then hopefully leave and allow the heavy lifting thereafter to be done by Peter Mandelson. Because Peter Mandelson has shown, he has demonstrated throughout his political career that he has the ability to assume whatever position is required on behalf of Her Majesty.
Great set. Now, Jonathan, of course, you are close to number 10. You've worked for Keir Starmer when you were serving as an MP. What do you think his approach is going to be on this trip? And do you think, I mean, there's been a lot in advance of Donald Trump starting about how difficult the relationship was going to be between Labour and the White House. There was criticism of Mandelson from some of Trump's advisors. I think one called him an absolute moron. But how do you think it's going?
Well, I mean, first of all, can I start by saying how delighted I am to be back here at the Spectator. When I saw the two hands go up for the people who thought the Labour government was doing well, I do rather feel like Daniel in the lion's den. So I'm looking forward to the conversations. But frankly, when you're a shadow Secretary of State and you lose your seat in a general election and all your colleagues form a government, frankly, you're grateful for any invitation. It's either given me something to do tonight by being here. Look, I think there's a serious point, which is, first of all, it is a good thing. It's obviously a good thing for Keir Starmer personally, but I think it's a good thing for the country that the UK Prime Minister has got this audience with President Trump this week. And he's got this audience way ahead of other Europeans. I know Macron was there earlier in the week, but nonetheless ahead of a lot of the other European leaders. And I think everybody who is a patriot, everyone who believes in this country, and as everyone in this room will do, have no doubt, will want that trip to succeed. Our relationship with the United States is what is our most important bilateral relationship internationally, and we have to build on it and we have to strengthen it. There are bonds between the United Kingdom and the United States which go back over many, many years, and we are rightly proud of that. And obviously, Keir Starmer has a different set of political values to Donald Trump. Obviously, no one is trying to pretend that they are on the same part of the political spectrum. I mean, it would be ludicrous to suggest that. But nonetheless, the bonds are more enduring, and their differences in political outlook, I think, can withstand that. I think the second thing which is interesting is that Keir Starmer's government this week has said that we should be spending more on defence and has taken a very tough decision to cut international aid in order to fund that expansion in defence expenditure. That is difficult for a Labour government. People who join the Labour Party generally join the Labour Party because they're motivated by issues of poverty, both domestically and internationally, and motivated by issues around public services. So do not underestimate what a big move it is for a Labour government to take a very tough decision on international aid. And it will go. I don't think there actually has to be a vote in Parliament as it happens, but even if there was a vote in Parliament, these Labour MPs would support that, and that is because we have a set of Labour MPs who support their Prime Minister. And in recent years, we've slightly got used to sort of chaos in Parliament, rebellions and governments not knowing whether they're going to get their programme through, even Prime Ministers being forced out and so on. There is a stability in Parliament now because of the 400 Labour MPs who are loyal to Keir Starmer. So, as it happens, I don't think there has to be a vote on this unless Katie tells me otherwise. But nonetheless, that decision will have the support of the Parliamentary Labour Party. Look, we'll see what happens on Thursday or Friday when we get the inevitable press conference of these two personalities stood side by side. There'll be lots of interpretation of their body language. There'll be lots of, the press will be looking for a snub. I remember back in the day when I worked for Gordon Brown, many, many years ago when Gordon Brown was Prime Minister on one of these trips, I think President Obama gifted him a set of Hollywood movies, and I think it turned out that I can't remember if they were video cassettes or if they were CDs, but whatever it was, it turned out that what was gifted to us would not work on the UK machines, right? And that was written up as a huge snub, as if the lobby loved it. They wrote lots of articles about how this was a devastating indictment of the relationship between President Obama and the Prime Minister. And actually what probably happened is some sort of middle-ranking staffer in the White House was probably sent out to buy these and didn't realise that they couldn't be played on UK machines. But there's no doubt something like that will happen again, and it'll be written up as if it's incredibly significant when it won't be. What is significant is that Keir Starmer is there. He seems to have built a reasonable rapport on President Trump. They seem to have a good working relationship, and hopefully they can find a way through which brings peace to Ukraine, but does so in such a way that doesn't completely sell them out and secures the ongoing future security of Europe.
Now, I want to bring Robert in a second on defence. And the New World Order. But first, Kate, given you've had your eyes and ears on America, and we do have Trump's, Trump 2.0, how do you think it is going, and how is it different to the first Trump term so far? And obviously we've seen Doge, we've seen various forms of chaos, talks of potential rifts, denials, but what are your main takeaways so far?
Well, I think the biggest difference is that he has a more specific sense of what he wants to do, and he knows how to do it. He knows what parts of the state were standing in his way, and he is knocking them down with bulldozers and an actual chainsaw gifted from Javier Milei, the Argentine president, to Elon Musk at CPAC. And he knows exactly what he wants, and he's going to try to get it this time. And when it comes to Britain's relationship with the US and how this is going to develop, and indeed Ukraine's relationship, countries that matter very much right now, I was thinking going into my last coffee house shots in the UK, I wanted to say something bold. I've come up with two thoughts that I think might age really, really badly in the next 24 hours, and I'm gonna go for them. The first is that what we learned from Donald Trump 1.0 is that he loves a show. He loves theater. He loves to perform. So what's happening over here and the language he's using and the way that he's riling everybody up has very little to do with what's actually happening in the real world, what his officials are doing, what's being processed. And this is a very good example this week. That last week, Donald Trump was calling President Zelensky a dictator, and this week it's very likely that Zelensky is going to be shaking his hand in front of cameras and in front of the video screens. And I think that gives us some reason to be optimistic. And here's where this opinion may just completely blow up. It gives us some reason to be optimistic that for all of Trump's ugly and petty banter, and he promised us vengeance and he's giving it, it turns out, to Ukraine, that there's reason to think that there's much more happening behind the scenes. And then another quite odd opinion, I think Keir Starmer's pulled a blinder when it comes to America. I also noticed the two hands that went up in the audience in terms of domestic policy, and I think you're completely right. But Keir Starmer seems to be the only European leader that Donald Trump has anything nice to say about. He thinks they're both big winners. He thinks that they both did very well in the election, and he likes that. And Starmer's decision to keep the UK's head down, to not talk tough on tariffs the way that the EU has been doing, to basically say nothing, to recognize that Donald Trump has a soft spot for the UK and he particularly loves Scotland, is quite a smart way to play this. And I think what Donald Trump did to Emmanuel Macron was nothing short of humiliating, putting him at the side of the desk and making him feel small. I suspect we're going to see something different when the Prime Minister properly meets with the President in Washington. I think it's going to be a pretty friendly conversation. Do I think Starmer is going to be able to convince Donald Trump to change his rhetoric on Ukraine? No, but I don't think anybody convinces Donald Trump, except for apparently Fox and Friends, what he should say about any particular topic. But I do think the Prime Minister has played this fairly well so far, and it might be possible going into the weekend that the write-ups are pretty good because they've got on. They've been friendly. And I think Keir Starmer made a great decision to speak to Donald Trump before the election, to have that dinner, to get on a good page. I think this is one of the few areas where you can give the Prime Minister some credit.
And on that point, I mean, let's just go back to the audience for a minute. So who here, raise your hand if you think that Donald Trump should be trusted and could be a good thing for Ukraine? Okay, not loads. And who thinks Donald Trump shouldn't be trusted on Ukraine? Okay, a bit more. Now, Robert, Kemi Badenoch this week gave a speech on the need for realism. There was also recently a Spectator cover on the need for realism, I think in advance of the speech.
Yes, but that Spectator cover story was in fact a rip-off of a column that Robert actually wrote in the Daily Telegraph a couple of weeks beforehand.
Okay, we're going full circle. Robert, do you think the rules have now changed in terms of how we are going to have to approach? Do you think we can no longer rely on America in the way we have for decades?
Well, firstly, good evening, and thank you, Katie, and Michael, and Kate for the invitation, and good luck in your new job in the United States with the Times. It's not the first time that Michael has joined an organisation everyone started to vote leave. Look, I slightly take issue with this idea that the world has fundamentally changed. I tend to think what's happened is that the rubber has hit the road, but that this has been a long time coming, and that you can place Donald Trump in a long historical line of American presidents. You know, which you can go back a very long way. But even in more recent times, it was Obama who said that the United States had to pivot to Asia. There's a cross-party consensus in Washington that the challenge of our generation is the rise of China. What's really happened is that Donald Trump has kind of called time, and the threats that have been made by successive presidents have now reached the point where Europe just has to step up and do what it hasn't done for the whole of our lifetimes. And in that sense, and I'll come to Donald Trump's language in a moment, but in that sense, I think it's a very legitimate point of view. You know, Europe is militarily weak. European leaders for decades have been weak and feckless, have underinvested in defense, have pursued a naive energy policy, have cozied up to other countries who mean us ill and not taken, more realistic attitudes. And that has to come to an end now. You've got a president who's finally saying enough is enough. Europe has to take responsibility, or a higher degree of responsibility, for its own defense. And I think that's both been a long time coming and actually a legitimate point of view. Now, I don't agree with the language that he said. I think the fact that he's used Vladimir Putin's talking points in recent weeks has been very harmful. It's offensive, isn't it? President Zelensky is not a dictator. He's an incredibly brave man. He stayed in Kyiv when people were out to kill him, when many people would have fled. And so what we have to do, and I think Keir Starmer has tried to do this, I think Kemi Badenoch tried to do this, is to strike that balance where we call out the things that we think Trump is getting wrong, but we're also understanding of the American position, which I think in many respects is a perfectly legitimate one. And we have to step up now as a continent and invest significantly more in our defense. And in that sense, I welcome what was said by the Prime Minister yesterday. I think it's pretty small beer, to be honest. I mean, 0.2% extra on defense in 2027 is nothing. Absolutely nothing. The Ministry of Defense is massively overspent on its existing budget. I suspect no one even knows what that's going to buy, if anything. It probably doesn't even provide enough money to restock the munitions that we've given to Ukraine and now need to purchase again. I think we're going to have to go very significantly further than that, and we're going to have to think of credible ways in which to fund that. As Kemi said, welfare reform is an obvious avenue. I'm pleased that Keir Starmer has said that he's going to use some of the international aid budget to fund this. There were lots of Labour politicians, incidentally, in the summer when I said that, who described me as populist, who said this was an outrageous position. It's just commonsensical, isn't it? You've got to ultimately do what is in the best interest of the country, and in a world of hard choices, it's better to be spending our money on hard power than on soft power in a moment like this. And so I think it's the right decision.
Okay, on that funding question, if we go with the idea that it's going to have to go much more above 2.5, obviously Keir Starmer setting out a way it could go up potentially to 3% in the future. Do you think welfare reform is going to be what might find the money, or are we actually going to have some pretty hard conversations about how we will fund the levels of defence spending needed in this current setup?
Well, it turns out all these conversations are hard, and it turns out politicians don't really want to cut anywhere or anything. We can talk, and The Spectator has, my colleague Michael Simmons a couple weeks ago did a cover about the Spectator's Doge. He's actually created a database you can use for free on the Spectator's website to find all the government waste. But
and then the name of that project, Kate?
The Spectator's Project for
against frivolous funding,
and you can take up the abbreviation on your own.
Project SPAF.
These are incredibly important points that nobody in government, and I'm not just going to say this one, previous ones as well, wanted to take up. Look, this is where I think you can pretty much criticize every major political party. Certainly Labour, certainly Tories, certainly Reform when it comes to the conversation that we're having now. It is egregious that the UK is not in a position where if it needs to find 15, 20, 25 billion pounds for an emergency, a shift in global power, an emphasis on Europe stepping up to defend itself. The core aspect of any state, if you believe in nations, if you believe in borders, if you believe in the nation state, you believe in a strong defense. The fact that the UK has no idea where, how it can find that money in a serious and long-term way is an absolute disgrace. And it is because every major... No major political party wants to talk about what's really tough. We can talk about finding welfare savings. There are savings to be found, but you have to talk about the health service. You have to talk about the state pension. You have to talk about things that no politician dare say out loud if you really want to talk about the core functions of the state. And I think that this is a challenge to Labour, to the Tories, to every major party, and it perhaps is the biggest challenge to reform. They're not on the stage, so slightly unfair. They can't represent themselves, but for all the traction they're getting, their economic side of their manifesto, it's fantasy at the moment. You can't just keep spending and then go, oh, actually, there's an emergency, where are we going to find the money? There is no money at the moment. So you either have to make the case to increase taxes, you have to make the case to cut other spending, or you have to grow the economy. Isn't that our favorite phrase these days from politicians, to grow the economy? Seeing as they haven't been able to do that in any meaningful way, let's actually talk seriously about budgets and where the money should go.
Well, I think there is an appetite in the Labour government for a serious conversation about some of these matters, not least because we've got no option, because President Trump's tariff regime is going to have an impact on us, regardless of whether they put tariffs on UK goods. I mean, essentially, what he is doing is that he is going to drive inflation in his economy, in my view, because he's going to do deficit expansion. Tariffs is going to mean higher prices for his own consumers. And the third element of his tariff plan is to drive demand in the US. I think it's inevitable that the Fed are going to respond with interest rate rises in the US. That's going to strengthen the dollar against sterling and the euro, and it's going to have an impact on global growth. And we are an economy which is open to trade. It's going to impact us here. It's going to impact our gilt yields. It's going to impact our fiscal position. So we're going to have to think seriously about this, and we're going to have to think seriously about what that means for the balance of tax and spend. However, I do think this Labour government can go into some territory which the previous Conservative government, albeit rhetorically, wanted to get to, but never could, which is on welfare reform and regulatory reform, actually. You know, if we continue with the current projections on disability spend, we're going to be hitting 100 billion by 2029. For adults, it'll be 75 billion. We'll be spending more on disability than we spend on defence, pretty much, right, in this country, on disability benefits. 3.5 million people are on the sickness-related element of disability benefits, and it's because there are problems with the structure now of universal credit, which is disincentivising people from trying to find work. That's the first thing. The second thing is, because it's an overhang from the pandemic, once you're on disability benefit, we used to be reassessing 40,000 people a month. That's gone down to about 2,000 since the pandemic. So it's no wonder the numbers on disability benefit have stayed at these huge, huge numbers. And actually, all the surveys suggest there's lots of people within that group who want to move into work if they were given the right help and the right support. I actually think that this Labour government is prepared to make, which will be some tough decisions on welfare reform, in the way in which the previous Conservative government did say it wanted to do rhetorically, but never actually got there. And on regulation, there's a very interesting and sort of government waste and quangos and all of that now. It's very interesting that if you talk to people in government, how interested they are becoming in this agenda, because they have found, once they've moved into government, that there is capital we want to put to work in this country in infrastructure projects, but we cannot spend it, we cannot get cranes in the sky and spades in the ground because of these vast waves of costly, time-consuming bureaucracy, that so much can go to court, so much can be JR'd all the time in court. This government is up for cutting away at some of this bureaucracy, which is holding back our ability to put capital to productive work in this country. So look, that's unusual, perhaps, from what people expect from a Labour government, but I think they're up for it. And as I said in my first answer, they've also got 400 Labour MPs who are prepared to push it through Parliament as well.
Now, Jonathan just talked. Jonathan just talked there, Michael, about some of the things this Labour government says it's going to do. It's going to stop various malign forces. Do you think there's been a shift in tone coming from Number 10 in this Labour government in recent months?
Yes, I do. I mean, well, the first thing is, I wish Jonathan's colleagues well in that endeavour. I mean, because it will be tough. There was a former Spectator editor who went on to become Chancellor of the Exchequer, Nigel Lawson. So there's hope for me yet. Who was once asked, how do you cope with the relentless pressure from Tory MPs for tax cuts? He said, if only. The relentless pressure that I get from Tory MPs is for public spending increases. I found that, and I know that Robert will have done. We were both at different times Secretary of State and broadly the same department. And again, without naming names, most of the time we would have colleagues coming to us explaining, A, why there shouldn't be new houses in their constituency, and then B, why we should give them 10, 15 or 20 million pounds for a wonderful, beautiful, beautiful project in their constituency. And of course we did our very best to do the latter, but not the former. Anyway, the reason I mention that is that when you do make a big public expenditure cut, then you face a backlash. And when I was Education Secretary right at the very beginning of the coalition government, cancelled the Labour government's Building Schools for the Future programme. That didn't mean that we weren't going to have any school rebuilding, but we thought that this programme was unjustifiably profligate. Anyway, that meant that we had to pause school rebuilding in a variety of areas. One of them was a Conservative area, and the local Conservative MP, rather than saying, well done, Gove, at last public expenditure is under control. We've seen the way that Greece has gone, and you're doing the right thing by cutting here. 3 cheers. Said, Michael, I'm afraid that my constituents are aghast at this. I'm going to be leading a march on Downing Street to demand your resignation. So, I do wish them well. But one thing that I have noticed, in fact, 2 things that I have noticed, is that this Prime Minister, whatever else one might think of him, learns on the job. And I think it is the case that he has appreciated, as Jonathan indicates, that if he's going to achieve the things he wants to in terms of growth, then some of the agencies, organizations, quangos, and bureaucracy that stand in the way of infrastructure being delivered will have to be tackled. So I think he was genuinely both aghast and angry that £110 million had to be spent on a bat tunnel to allow HS2 to proceed. I think he'll come up against some challenges, because it is the case that the reason why we have these rules and regulations is because in the UK we have more people who are members of wildlife and conservancy organisations per capita than any other country in the world. And it's also the case that there are people in Keir Starmer's government, friends of his, who are very attached to the whole structure of judicial review and the courts restraining the executive. So it will be tough, but I think that he does recognise, and this is the second thing, unless the government is seen to deliver change, then that's it. So people were exasperated with us as Conservatives, especially me. not Robert, me. Exasperated, kicked us out. They want change. And if Labour merely occupy office and don't do anything terribly wrong, that won't be enough. And a phrase has been adopted by some people around Keir Starmer called insurgent government. And what that means, I think, is a desire to show to people that having voted for change, it will be delivered, and it will be delivered in areas that matter. So that's both infrastructure, the economy, but also crime and migration as well. And again, many of the people who were Jonathan's colleagues before might be uncomfortable with that, but I suspect the realization is dawning on those who may have been uncomfortable initially that their voters, or a significant chunk of their voters, if they don't see that change, won't be returning them to Westminster at the next general election. And the final thing I would say is that the person who I think more than anyone who's been responsible for that is the Prime Minister's relatively new Chief of Staff, Morgan McSweeney. And he was the guy who, along with Jonathan, delivered Labour's landslide election victory. So even dyed-in-the-wool Tories like me have to acknowledge that he has, I think, correctly identified the single most important challenge for Labour. And even though the first 6 or 7 months of Labour government were wasted, I think, nevertheless, they've woken up and they have smelt what defeat might be like, and are reacting appropriately.
Robert.
Well, I don't really know what Keir Starmer stands for and who is running this country right now. It feels to me if the most powerful person in Britain today probably is Morgan McSweeney. I don't think that Keir Starmer believes in cutting the international aid budget to spend it on defence. I think the last sort of remnant of Keir Starmer is the Chagos deal, which speaks more to his agenda than anything that we're seeing latterly. But I agree with Michael that it sounds like Morgan McSweeney is starting to lead the way. But I think the government doesn't have any kind of plan. I mean, I can't think of a government in my lifetime that has come into office with so little agenda. You know, Michael, when you became Education Secretary in 2010, you say, you might have made a blunder or were criticised for stopping that Building Schools for the Future programme. But you walked in through the door with a bill, didn't you, for free schools?
Yeah.
With an agenda. You'd spent years thinking about it. I cannot think of a single government department where that's the case. I mean, I was in the Home Office, and you have probably the most equipped person to be Home Secretary in Yvette Cooper. She was Shadow Home Secretary. She chaired the Home Affairs Select Committee. Then she returned as Shadow Home Secretary. She spent 10, 15 years auditioning for this job. I can't really name anything that she's done in the first 6 or 9 months in office. And I agree with you, Michael, that I think the public are yearning for change. They feel that the last Conservative government failed to deliver on some of the most important issues facing the country. We didn't bring down migration. The state is not working. Taxes are too high. Many public services like the NHS, for example, have been treated like a religion rather than a public service to be reformed. There are many failings. And then that Conservative government, which was removed has been replaced by one which seems even more inept than what came before. And that is what is pushing people to reform. That is what's breeding this deep sense of disenchantment in the country. And I see no route out for that. And the biggest issue of all to me is, where is the growth going to come from in this country? And Kate's right to say that politicians, Liz Truss, whoever it is, everybody says growth is, we're going to get the economy growing again. But we do know some ways to get the economy growing again, don't we? I think all power to Angela Rayner if she can build more homes and reform the planning system. I support her in that endeavor. I think we've got to have a different energy policy as a country. And no government can seriously say that they care about economic growth and yet have Ed Miliband as our energy secretary. You can't have a prime minister stand up in the House of Commons yesterday, sort of cosplaying Winston Churchill, saying that the country is on a war footing, and then the next morning we wake up to the Committee on Climate Change saying they're going to ban lawnmowers and destroy what remains of our industrial base. Let's get serious. Have a proper energy policy, build homes, try and get the economy moving again. I hope that Labour managed to do those things, because I don't want to see the country stagnate for another 4 or 5 years. And I think that will be immensely harmful, frankly, to both major political parties. People are yearning for change. But if Labour aren't capable of doing it, then it obviously falls to my party and the new leadership that we're under to come up with a proper plan.
Now, I'm going to come to audience questions in about 5 minutes, so please start thinking if you have not already. Just picking up there on something you said there, Robert. I mean, you're talking about how the country wants change. You see in the steep fall in its popularity that the Labour government had, that many do not think that change is coming from number 10. Yet, you mentioned reform. Do you think the Tories are doing enough of a good job at the moment of trying to establishing the idea that they could be the driving force, or are you being pushed really to the side? And before we came in the green room, we did discuss. There is a poll out tonight which has the Tories ahead by 1 point, but it's an outlier. And actually, it's more common at the moment to see polls with Reform, Labour, and then the Tories and the Conservatives in third place.
Well, look, I said just after the general election, I think it's still true today, that reform is a symptom, not a cause. It exists because we failed. We made big promises to the British public, and we didn't deliver them. And of course, the most prominent of those was immigration, where we said we were going to bring it down. In fact, we contrived an immigration system that was even more liberal than the one we had within the European Union. I think the points-based system that was created after the 2019 general election was amongst the worst public policy mistakes of the 21st century. And we have to atone for those errors. And it's not going to be quick. I don't think the public are going to rush back to us. I think this is going to be a long haul. We have to be honest about the mistakes we made. Kemi has certainly begun to do that. And then we've got to slowly regain trust and credibility on those issues. And look, reform are raising issues that many people in this country care about. Crime, net zero, migration, pride in our country. And people are flocking to their banner as a result of that. But I don't think that, that we should have talk of pacts. Neither party wants that. Both leaders have said it's not going to happen. Nigel Farage has said he wants to destroy the Conservative Party, and it's not in either party's electoral interest to do that. The Conservative Party has to re-establish itself as a credible party that has serious solutions to those issues and show that we have actually learnt our lessons. And that is my mission. I think that's what Kemi wants to do as well. That's what we're working to achieve.
Now, you're very active. Both in your shadow brief and your social media profile, so active that you now top the Conservative Home Shadow Cab League table.
I would say when I was trying to build houses, I was bottom of the Conservative Home League table. So I've seen triumph and disaster and treat them as the imposters that they are.
That's why we are where we are.
But I wanted, you're obviously a very busy member of the Shadow Cabinet. One of the increasing criticisms you hear about Kemi Badenoch from some anonymous Tory MPs, from some more vocal activists, is the idea that she might just be a little bit lazy. She doesn't do enough. What do you say to that?
I don't think that's fair at all. Look, I think that...
Do you think you see her working hard?
I think Kemi's doing a very good job, actually. I think it's a very hard job being leader of the opposition. Ask that to William Hague, anyone who's held those jobs in the past. The problem is not Kemi Badenoch's leadership. The problem is the public's view of the Conservative Party after 14 years in office, and the brand of the Conservative Party is at the lowest ebb that I've known it in my lifetime. That is what we've got to try to turn around. I do think that opposition, I've only been doing this for 9 months now, and Jonathan had to do it for a long period of time. My philosophy is that it's about hustling, isn't it? You've got to be kind of an entrepreneur. You've got to wake up every day and think, how are we going to prosecute an argument? How are we going to hold Labour to account? How can we be the strongest possible opposition? And that is a mindset that we're all learning, and that everybody in the shadow cabinet, in the parliamentary party, has to get. But I'm confident that we will get there. But as I said earlier, I think it is a long path. Such is the level of anger and frustration with the Conservative Party on some of those issues. It's not going to be quick to turn this around.
Kate, are we being a bit harsh on Kemi Badenoch?
Are we being a bit harsh? I never think you can be too harsh on politicians as long as we're operating within the law, right? We're not advocating anyone to be too unkind to anybody, but I think it's legitimate to be harsh on politicians. I think Kemi Badenoch has made a semi-smart decision to not rush public policy, but I also think that the days and weeks and years tick down very quickly. I think Labour's learned this in the hardest way, sorry, Jonathan. That first budget is going to set the tone of the entire Parliament. And as Michael was saying, he did the really tough stuff on education. He made the cuts, he made the changes quickly, so by the time you get to the end of the Parliament, you can see the success. Labour decided to present its first budget as we're going to give an inflation-busting pay raise to public sector unions and we're going to hike tax. And don't worry, guys, the growth will come after. Shockingly, that didn't work. But then, apologies to Robert and the Tory party, what was the comeback? What was the serious comeback? Yes, taxes are too high. What is the alternative? What is the very serious alternative to tackle the national debt, to tackle the deficit, to deal with every horrible public policy disaster, frankly, that has come out of COVID? You can argue it was necessary, you can argue it wasn't, but we have so much from education to crime to housing to deal with. And I don't think any of those answers are being put on the table by either party. And I know the Tories have made a choice not to, but it already does feel like we're well into this Parliament. The honeymoon ended a long time ago. And the Tories are going to have to offer more, I think, at a much faster pace.
Now, just before we go to questions, Michael, we potentially have a by-election coming up. This week we had Mike Amesbury, the former Labour MP, once a stormtrooper, then suspended after he was filmed assaulting someone. And he has received 10 weeks. He's yet to resign, even though Reform have sent a van up to the constituency, urging everyone to resign, and if not, to sign a petition. How important do you think this by-election is going to be? Because it's really a very safe Labour seat, but Reform think they have a chance. The Tories aren't really in the fight, but yet they're not going to, well, they're being asked to stand aside as the beginning of a Tory-Reform pact, but that seems unlikely.
Yeah, I think that Labour will probably hold this seat, not because the government is vastly popular, but just because of some very specific factors. So, of course, people don't like being asked to vote in by-elections because their MP or ex-MP has done something foolish or stupid. So there won't be any sort of residual affection for Mike Amesbury. But this seat has been more or less Labour forever. And it's also the case that in electoral terms, there's a sort of an area in Cheshire and around Liverpool that was never really part of the Red Wall. So when seats elsewhere fell to the Tories or had a big Brexit vote in them, they tended to be in the mill towns of East Lancashire or on the East Coast, but not in that sort of extended, greater Mersey-influenced area. So I actually think that this is a less propitious ground for reform than some other areas might be. But one doesn't know. The comparison I think that is of interest is way back in 1981 when there was a by-election in Warrington, which is also in a similar part of the country. Roy Jenkins was the candidate for the SDP, and he was supposed to make what he called a big breakthrough there. It didn't happen. He lost. But nevertheless, for the rest of that parliament, the Liberal SDP alliance won scores of by-elections, divided the left vote, and ushered in a landslide for Margaret Thatcher in 1983. So I think that even if Reform don't win, there's still going to be a feature and a factor for some time to come. But as I say, I wouldn't overstate the significance of the single by-election.
And one cheeky last question from me to Jonathan, which is, Labour are yet to pick a candidate for the by-election. Of course, you are missed in Parliament these days. And I did some Googling before I got here, and it turns out you're born in Salford, which is about a 40-minute drive from the seat. So I don't think you'd even be a carpetbagger.
Well, I mean, I was rather hoping I'd be the next political editor of The Spectator, actually.
Join the queue.
Look, I think there's more chance of Lord Lucan riding Shergar down Runcorn High Street than me being the candidate. I've been a by-election candidate before, and I'm not expecting to be a by-election candidate again. But look, Nigel Farage, they start off as the bookies' favourites for this seat. If there is a by-election, I presume there will be one. I understand the MP hasn't... I mean, the MP should resign, by the way, but I think he's appealing his conviction, I presume. But I mean, there will be a by-election sooner or later, I guess. But the Reform do start as the bookies' favourites, and they are going to throw everything at it. So it is going to be an interesting test of whether their big talk actually, when it hits the road, whether they can actually deliver. Previous by-elections, admittedly when it was a Tory government, towards the end of the Tory government, and they talked big, they didn't get anywhere, but it's going to be very, very interesting. That's certainly true.
Okay, let's get some questions. We're going to do two at a time.
Question for anyone, or perhaps one of our current or former Conservative MPs. I don't want to hit any soft spots, but at the Conservative leadership election, James cleverly talked about perhaps the Conservative Party becoming a bit more normal, he said. And I was wondering, in the run-up, especially to distinguish the Tory party from Reform and not get swallowed up, do you see any merit in normalising the Tory party? And if so, or if not, how would you like to see the Tory party pivot ideologically before the next election?
Okay, so your question on being normal. And then let's take one more question, please.
Thank you, Michael and Robert. The part has played in helping Ukraine and really setting a precedent for Europe's support. Do you think UK will find itself in a difficult position now to either ally itself with Europe, who will be approaching, we need to do this for that, America, or do you think it'll try to build that stronger relationship with America and maybe perhaps ask themselves a question whether they want to align themselves with someone who voted alongside Russia and North Korea recently in resolution? Thank you.
Great, thank you. So UK aligning UK, Russia, Europe, and then, of course, tourism being normal. I think for the normal question, it's going to have to be Michael or Rob who wants to take that.
Well, I am not normal. I'm very abnormal. Successful Conservative leaders in the past have included some very abnormal people. Neither Margaret Thatcher nor Ted Heath, I think, would necessarily have passed the someone you would have wanted to have had a pint in the pub with test. I think that with Ted you would have had a frosty ignoral, and with Margaret Thatcher you would have been lectured on how much more that pint of beer cost under a Labour government than under a Conservative government. So my broader point is that of course, politics, it's a cliche, has become more presidential in the way in which it's perceived, but I think actually ideas matter more. And it may be an old-fashioned view and it may be an idealistic view, but I think that people choose their Prime Minister not necessarily on the basis of the warmth and approachability of their personality, but the clarity of their thinking and the quality of the prescription that they offer for the country. So, in that sense, you choose a spouse, you choose your friends on the basis of likability and normality, but you also, when you're choosing a political leader, you're choosing someone to do, a Prime Minister in particular, a specific job. So that would be my take.
Great. Who wants to take the Ukraine question?
Well, can I just make a comment on the Tory party? Because we at Labour Together, this think tank that I'm now involved in, we're both a think tank and basically a polling organisation. We do a lot of polling and focus groups with a view to helping the Labour government think about its policy agenda. So there is a political stance, a political reason why we're doing polling. But it's certainly true, and if I will be frank with you, and I hope the audience isn't too upset with me when I point this out. Our polling, our focus groups, I think it'd be fair to say that Kemi Badenoch, she is sinking without trace in our focus groups. She really is. And I think it comes to this point that Robert made about hunger. I mean, I spent 13, 14 years as in opposition, and a good 6 or 7 years, maybe 7 or 8 years, I can't quite remember, but a long time in the opposition front bench. You do have to wake up every morning working out how you are going to take the fight to the government. And I think in fairness to Robert, you are taking the fight to my government day in, day out, actually. And when you're in opposition, all you have is the power of your words and the extent to which you can use your words, your speeches, your media interviews, your social media to capture attention and find an argument that strikes a chord with the voters that you are trying to persuade. And it is hard. Sometimes people think opposition is just throwing stones at the government and hoping eventually one of the stones will smash a window. Well, now and again, you will smash a window. But that's not really what the voters are looking for. They're looking to see whether you can make and run with a bigger argument. And it is difficult. It's frustrating. There'll be knockbacks because you're not the most interesting politician in the land. Government ministers, by the charisma of their incumbency, because they're government ministers, and the fact that they can pull levers and do things as government ministers, are much more interesting. And I think the problem that Kemi Badenoch is finding is that it doesn't feel like she wakes up every morning with that hunger. So my sort of advice, and I ought not to be giving advice to my Tory opponents or the people, because I want my Labour government to succeed, but my advice to the Tory party and the Tory front bench is all find the same hunger that Robert is displaying day after day.
Thank you. Can I just come in on the question of weirdness? Because Michael once accused me of being a Tory boy in the summer.
Yeah.
I was thinking as one myself.
And it was during the leadership campaign.
Yeah,
Do you think it impacted the result?
It definitely helped, Robert.
Well, Michael was the big endorsement that I was looking for, but I didn't quite get it. The one thing I was going to say was to endorse what Michael said is that it feels to me as if British politics right now, there's a sort of hollowness to it, really. There aren't big figures at the moment in British politics. We have a Prime Minister who is not a charismatic person, doesn't really have a great vision. As I said earlier, I think the policies that he's bringing forward seem now to be more being handed to him by Morgan McSweeney than things that he believes in his heart. And there aren't really big solutions to the problems facing the country. It feels to me as if we're in a sort of interregnum. One period has ended, a series of big challenges face the country, and we're waiting for people to step up, bring forward serious solutions, whether it is on migration, the economy, net zero, the public services, the size of the state, defense, you name it. And so in that sense, I'm not sure, though obviously people want to have likable personalities leading the country, I feel the state of the country is so serious now that actually what people really are crying out for are people who appear to get that and have serious answers to those challenges. And if we were, as a Conservative Party, to be lucky enough to get back into government again, say after the next general election, and didn't deliver, I just think the public would be so aghast, it would be immensely corrosive to public trust. And so we have to have really, really well thought through, serious and credible solutions, because that, I think, is what the public are crying out for right now.
Just briefly on the very good question about Ukraine, It's fiendishly difficult for any British government, whether it was led by the Conservatives or Labour, to find its way through at the moment. But I would just say two things. As acknowledged by both Robert and by Jonathan, the UK will has had to rearm, and one part of that is both reassuring the United States that we're going to take increased responsibility for defence of our neighbours in our own backyard, and also part of that is going to have to be learning from the change on the battlefield that we've seen in the Ukraine war, that has upended a number of assumptions about how future conflicts will be fought. My hunch is that whether you consider the deal that Donald Trump is offering the Ukrainian people to be shabby and transactional, and I do, but whatever you think of it, it will probably result in the conflict freezing, and that, I think, is an opportunity for us to learn from Ukraine, but also to play our part in ensuring that the men, the material, and the support is there in order to make a further incursion by Putin unthinkable, because the cost would be too high.
Absolutely. Kate, do you want to? Sorry.
Well,
and then I'll get one more round of questions.
I suppose I would just say the extent to which the Prime Minister is torn between Europe and America really does indeed depend on how long the war goes on for. And I also wouldn't make the assumption that Europe will necessarily be on the same page if America does pull its funding, pull its support for Ukraine. Is Europe ready to come together and find the funds to fill that gap? Can they do that? Is Keir Starmer, he says he's willing to put boots on the ground for peacekeeping efforts. Is Europe willing and ready to do that for war efforts? I don't think Europe is going to be as united on that front as perhaps it seems now. And that's why I think that it is quite right, and in some ways, let's be very honest, easier at the moment for Europe to lambast Donald Trump, as they should, about the language he uses around Ukraine and Zelensky. But the idea that America might get a freeze or indeed an end to the war would be incredibly beneficial, not just for American taxpayers and not just for the young and older men dying on the front lines in Ukraine, but for Europe as well, which is not actually really ready or able to step up to the plate where America to truly withdraw its support.
I'm just going to take two more questions because otherwise we're going to run out of time. So and I can see your hands now, so that's great.
Thank you very much. I've very much enjoyed this evening. Thank you. Like Michael Gove, I am a very proud Aberdonian working in the city of London. And I was interested today to read about BP. Going back to oil, I think, was the strapline across the BBC. But of course, reading into that, BP, I doubt very much will be doing any drilling whatsoever in our own North Sea because it's too expensive, because of the taxes. Just a quick question, really. How worried are you about the North Sea and Aberdeen, Michael Gove?
Okay, North Sea and that's a Michael Gove specific question that others can join in. And then let's get our next question.
Yes, hopefully, Kate, we'll see you back soon. But also, I think it's important how we spend our money, because nobody's really raised it, and I hope Jonathan passes this through, in terms of the wastage in capital and revenue programs. That will give us the money. But also on the military, we have a lack of experienced personnel, and also in some of our industries as well. And this is the problem. We're not even doing some of our basics, whether it's in the Royal Navy, British Army, or the Royal Air Force, and we're way behind some of our European neighbours. And I think that needs to be considered. Thank you.
Right, and I'm going to drive our lovely events team mad and take one more question, because I think this way we can fit a few more in. So to make it easy, let's go for, you get to pick. I think there's a hand up just there.
Given that the transatlantic alliance is falling apart and the US is looking like we can't trust it for our defence, and it's looking like we're going to have to rely on Europe pulling together for our defence, do you, the members of the panel, regret Brexit?
Oh, okay, spicy. I like it. Is that Michael Gove specific or no?
Sounds like it.
Michael, why don't you start?
Okay, so apologies, John. Some things the Labour government is doing, I think, are great, but one of the worst things they're doing is their policy on energy, Robert Jenrick made that point earlier. I'd like to consider myself as green. I do think that we do need to move away over time from hydrocarbons, but we're doing it far too fast. It means that the hydrocarbons that our economy needs will continue to be supplied, but be supplied in a way which means that we put more power in the hands of Putin and the Saudis. It means that our carbon emissions, or global carbon emissions, are greater than they would otherwise be. And it also means that we continue to have higher energy costs. Our energy costs are 4 times those of America, and that will contribute to deindustrialization overall. So it's not just a tragedy for Aberdeen, it undermines global security, it doesn't contribute to the war against climate change, and it also means that the economic base that our country must rely on, the industrial base our country must rely on in order to power growth in the future, is being eroded faster than at any time in our history. So it's a tragedy. Ed Miliband is a gifted and talented person, but he's using all his gifts and all his talents to drive this country into the ground. Then, on Brexit, no, I don't, because one of the problems with the EU's hitherto established position on defence and security is that every spare pound that you give to Europe for its common security and foreign policy architecture, it goes on conferences, communiques, junkets, and more 4- and 5-star generals based in attractive chateaux outside Brussels. It doesn't actually go on kit and increasing firepower. And if you look at the countries of Europe, there are basically those countries which are the Joint Expeditionary Force, Britain, the Baltics, the Nordics, and the Dutch, who have truly professional militaries that are capable of rising to the challenge of modern warfare. Some of those countries, notably, of course, Norway, are not in the European Union, but they're among our most professionally military deployable allies. The other, of course, big country is France, which has the capacity to project force abroad. But France is never going to surrender control of its armed forces to a pan-European or multilateral organization. So, in that sense, if it's a choice between the approach of General de Gaulle or the approach of Guy Verhofstadt, I think that General de Gaulle and an approach based on national sovereignty and a recognition that people fight and die for their family and their country, not for abstract ideals, I think that is a better way of thinking about defence in the future.
Okay. We've got 5 minutes, so we're going to go Robert, Jonathan. I'm going to give Kate the last word, and you didn't get to ask a question. Just grab people so they can't leave as they exit the stage and have a one-on-one exclusive. Okay, Robert.
Well, firstly, I don't think we should write off the transatlantic relationship. Let's wait and see what actually happens. I think Donald Trump is a much more complicated person than some parts of the media would like to think. In his first administration, he left more troops in Europe than there were when he arrived. He actually funded Ukraine. Let's see what this minerals agreement that he's about to sign actually contains. It sounds like it may contain a security guarantee for Ukraine. Some of the things that have been debated are actually in a long line of US history, asking for something in return for giving protection. I mean, the Monroe Doctrine, the loans that the US gave to us during the Second World War, tariff reform that they forced on us during the First World War. There's a long history here. So let's actually wait and see. I actually think that in terms of Brexit, on an issue I've obviously given a lot of thought to in recent years, migration, the decision to leave the European Union will turn out to be one of the most important that we've made in our modern history. Because I think in mass migration, as we're now discovering, will be the defining generational challenge in pretty much every Western country. And the ability to secure your borders as much as any country can, I think is a huge prize. We haven't used that correctly. We have misused it, pulled the levers in entirely the wrong directions, But I think the fact that we have control of those levers is something that future generations will thank us for. And I think Michael did a great job in that respect and will be thanked in the future when the UK is able to control its borders like no other country in Europe and few other countries in the world. To your point, sir, about the North Sea oil and gas, I think it's a terrible situation. It's one of the biggest failings of this government. As Michael said, Ed Miliband is a dangerous man because he knows what he wants to do. It's just what he wants to do is a disaster for this country. And the decision to move away from oil and gas is going to compromise hundreds of thousands of jobs, billions of pounds in tax revenues, and it's just not serious. It's not serious when you're saying that we're facing, Vladimir Putin, these challenges for our national security. We've got to have energy security. We've got to have Treasury having the revenue that's needed to fund defense and public services, and we've got to have a fundamentally different policy. I also blame my own government for that, because I think net zero 2050 was the ultimate example of poor decision-making. A debate that lasted 90 minutes, no vote on it. Philip Hammond, I was a junior minister in the Treasury at the time. Philip was in a war with Michael over some of his green policies. And Philip once turned to me and said that we debated banning plastic straws more than we did the biggest change to our economy since the Industrial Revolution. And that was true. So we've got to grow up, have a more serious policy. And that means, yes, decarbonize, but do so in a sensible and pragmatic way, which defends our industrial base such that it is, and ensures that we have national security as well.
So I voted for Remain in that referendum, and I don't regret the way I cast my ballot in that referendum. I just want to mention one thing. I'm not going to attempt to rebut Robert or Michael on the various points where they've given us their opinion of the state of my Labour government, because I don't think I'm not playing at home tonight, am I? So I don't think there's much point. So I just want to make a slightly different adjacent point. Robert touched upon this, and I just want to mention this very briefly in conclusion, because I think this issue is going to shoot up the political agenda over the next 12, 18 months. And it is this issue around critical minerals. Nobody's really given much attention to the critical minerals deal with Ukraine. We're obviously more focused on the future security of Europe for very, very understandable reasons. But I think increasingly access to critical minerals is going to become a hot political issue. Frankly, we are too reliant at the moment on China for absolutely vital critical minerals, which are integral not only to whether we become an AI superpower, but integral to whether we can spend that defence increase sensibly on the type of modern equipment that will keep us safe. At the moment, too much of the West is completely dependent on China and other countries that we don't want to be dependent on. So that means we've got to think about how we stockpile lithium and tin. We've got to think about the deals that we can do with other countries around the world. There are other countries on the globe who produce these critical minerals. We've just become too lazy and allowed China to dominate the world market on this. So I think it's going to be very interesting what deal is signed with Ukraine on this. But I suspect, and my hunch is, over the next 12 to 18 months, we're going to be talking about this a hell of a lot more in British politics as well. And we've got to get a strategy in place in this country about how we can access critical minerals in a sensible way, because it is actually vital to our own security as a nation.
Very right.
And Kate, with that, your last Coffee House Shots Live, last word.
Oh, I'm getting emotional. On Brexit, I was a young immigrant American when Michael Gove was staging the referendum. I did not dare have an opinion when it was going on. It wouldn't have been appropriate. I didn't have a vote. So I listened. And I've been watching very closely as a journalist over the years. And I'll say this. It's difficult to name so far too many benefits of Brexit. But the benefits I can name are very impressive. The vaccine rollout. People say you could have gone your own way if you had been in the European Union, but Europe didn't. go its own way. The UK was able to be nimble and quick and save countless lives. And the other major example is Ukraine. The UK was able to come out with its own voice, stronger and faster than any other country in the world, to defend Zelensky and the Ukrainian people who were standing up to an aggressor. And it was able to create its own scheme for Ukrainian refugees to come to the UK, and there was never a people and never a country kinder or more accepting than those refugees who came to seek peace. And since you've given me the last word, that's very kind, Katie, I'm not going to be unfair, because if I start talking too much about immigration, Robert will want to respond. And we've already had our big immigration debate at party conference a couple years ago, but I will just say this.
I thought you were a reformed character now.
Reformed character, Robert, I'm doubling down on the benefits of migration. We'll do this another time, but I will just say this, thinking about the way that the UK responded to Ukraine, there is a reason that immigration figures have been so elevated the past couple of years. And I would just say this, a nation has to do what's right for the nation. I'm not going full out Britain first, but a nation has to think about what's right for the UK. Never take for granted the fact that people want to come here. I wanted to come here. There aren't that many countries that you can truly name. America and the UK, they might be having their differences right now, but they sit in this very small pool of countries where people from all over the world are desperate to come here and desperate to be British. And I would just say, do what you need to do what's right for the UK, but never take that for granted. It is a wonderful thing to say about the UK that people want to be British.
What a note to end on. I almost don't want to speak now. But with that, can we just say thank you to our fantastic panel, and thank you to all of you for coming out tonight.
And as new figures came out showing an 11-year high in young people not in education, employment or training, here's my take. The number of young people not doing anything with their lives has hit its highest level in 11 years. Figures released this morning by the Office for National Statistics on 16 to 24-year-olds not in education, employment or training, so-called NEETs, show that the number has reached just under 1 million in the last 3 months of 2024. Standing at 987,000, the number of NEETs is up by 110,000 since the end of 2023, equivalent to a town the size of Oldham. The new data means that nearly 1 in 7 Britons aged 16 to 24 are not in education, employment or training. The figures were worse for young men than for women, 14.4% for young men versus 12.3% for young women. However, ONS statisticians said that the increase in the last 12 months came from men and women equally. Of the nearly 1 million NEETs, some 392,000 were unemployed but looking for work, whilst alarmingly, the remaining 595,000 were classed as economically inactive, meaning they're not even looking for work. Meanwhile, the number of 16 to 24-year-olds in the UK registered as out of work because of long-term illness jumped 15% in the year to September, where we have the most recent figures, and now stands at 266,000. Increases in economic inactivity since the first year of the pandemic were largely among those aged 16 to 24, but in the same time period, those inactive in the 25 to 34-year-old age group barely changed. Is this new generation just lazy? Some blame the rise in mental health conditions for the increase in young people living idle lives. Almost 1 in 5 young adults has a mental health condition, and as I reported last month, there's been an alarming rise in mental health problems among children. A fifth of 8 to 16-year-olds are experiencing a probable mental health disorder, up 125%. Others fear that GPs are too quick to diagnose mental health conditions and dish out antidepressants. The number of patients of all ages prescribed antidepressants in the UK has shot up in recent years. Figures from the King's Trust Youth Index survey that was also released today show that a third of NEETs want to work but fear their mental health prevents them, whilst 1 in 5 are applying for jobs every day without success. It's certainly true that the labour market has been cooling for at least a year, but vacancies still remain above pre-pandemic levels, with 819,000 recorded last month. It's hard to escape the conclusion that those young men and women who say they really want to find work could be trying a bit harder. However, in April, Labour's Make Work Pay policy kicks in and we'll see the minimum wage for under 21s increase by 16%. That's not likely to increase youth employment. Worse still, the Chancellor's £25 billion national insurance tax rate will make employing anyone unattractive, not just the young. But most worryingly, once someone sets off down the path of believing they're too ill, too stressed, or too anxious to work or study, they enter a cycle that's incredibly difficult to escape. The 110,000 who have found themselves joining the NEETs category over the last year are likely to be condemned to a life of inactivity and reliance on the welfare state. It's a tragedy that's not only economic, but human. If we want to prevent an idle generation from becoming a forgotten one, ministers will have to act, and they'll have to act fast. If, as seems likely, the idle young do end up condemned to a life on the dole, they'll contribute to a ballooning and unsustainable benefits bill. Department for Work and Pensions data shows nearly 6 million Brits on out-of-work benefits. Forecasts of the country's disability benefits caseload expect 990 people to be granted welfare payments every single day, with a surge predicted over this Parliament. Personal independence payment awards because of anxiety and depression have gone from just over 2,000 a month before COVID to nearly 6,000 a month now. None of this is getting better. Some argue that hard work doesn't pay anymore, that putting in the hours and trying to better yourself doesn't move you on in life. And to be fair, plenty of evidence supports that view. From home ownership rates, the amount of space in a house share that the average rent gets you these days, and stagnant living standards over the long term. But just because things are harder than they were for the generations that went before, that's no excuse for giving up. The reason so many migrants want to come here, illegally or otherwise, from all over the world is because Britain is still seen as a nation where working hard can get you ahead in life. That's still the case. This is not a statistical crisis, it's a generational emergency. 1 million young people adrift, a benefits bill soaring, and a government with words that are not turning into actions. We're watching in real time the making of a lost generation. Young men and young women trapped in a cycle of inactivity, anxiety, and state dependency, their futures slipping through their fingers. What kind of country allows this to happen? If nothing changes, Britain will not just be paying for these failures in welfare costs, we'll be paying in lost potential, in broken ambition, in an economy that limps where it should stride. Are we seeing a redrawing of not just geopolitical fault lines, but also the very principles that govern our international relations? Our features editor, William Moore, interviews Michael Gove and the author, Robert Kaplan.
You say that Trump has some harsh lessons for Europe, and that in response, Europe needs a realist reset. Could you start by briefly explaining for our viewers how you came to that conclusion and what this realist reset might look like?
Over the course of the last week, we've seen President Trump himself and members of his administration issuing some very bracing messages, to put it mildly. So last week, we had J.D. Vance at the Munich Security Conference upbraiding European countries for not respecting free speech, not having confidence in their own cultures, and not stepping up to the mark in terms of defense of the West overall. And just in the last couple of days, of course, we've had President Trump pushing forward his own peace plan for Ukraine without Ukraine, talking direct through his Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, to the Russians, and indeed even accusing Vladimir Zelensky of having failed to conclude a peace that would have protected his own people. Now, we might deprecate some of those remarks in the UK, but what we have to realise is that the rules-based international order, which our diplomats and our colleagues and allies have believed in so strongly, is something that President Trump does not believe in. He believes that America has been paying for the order while other countries set the rules. And so we're moving, I think, backwards, for want of a better word, to an area or a time of great power contention. And I think the guides to that time are more the works of Thucydides, recognizing that the strong take what they can, the weak endure what they must, but also the works of our guest Robert Kaplan, whose new book Wasteland paints a picture of the challenges that we faced at a time when many of the certainties with which we've grown up are crumbling.
Well, Robert, as Michael said, your new book, Wasteland, A World in Permanent Crisis, in it you declare that we're entering a new era of global cataclysm. I mean, very strong words indeed. What do you think are the key drivers of this new era? I mean, how did we end up here?
If you enjoy what we do here at Spectator TV, then why not subscribe to the magazine as well? If you subscribe today, you'll get 12 weeks for just £12, plus a free £20 John Lewis and Waitrose gift card. You can sign up at spectator.co.uk/TV offer.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say I was really impressed how Michael began his excellent essay in the new issue of The Spectator with a quote from Roger Scruton, who's somebody I admire very much and I used as an epigram in my new book. So we're clearly on the same wavelength. When I talk about entering a period of global cataclysm, it has several aspects. One is that geography has been shrunk by technology, which means we're all closer together, we're all trapped with each other. We're all we all live in a more anxious, claustrophobic, crowded world where events and crises in one part of the earth can ricochet around the earth and affect events and crises in the opposite side of the earth to a degree much faster than ever before. We're also seeing what I call the gradual weakening of all the great powers. The United States, which I can go into, I think Trump's era, golden age, is really an era of decline. I think China has a lot of problems that don't get in the media as much as they should because China is such an autocratic lockdown state. And I think as long the war in Ukraine that has gone on for 3 long years has weakened Russia's ability to project power in the Caucasus, in Central Asia, in Siberia, and the Russian Far East. So I think the long war in Ukraine will eventually be seen as sort of a death knell of the Russian Empire.
But if these 3 global powers are in their own ways weakening, who do you think benefits from this new world disorder?
Well, they're all weakening at different paces and at different rates. So that, if China and Russia are declining at a faster rate than the United States, for the time being, has a relative advantage, even under Trump. I don't think the BRICS benefit because I think that they don't represent a coherent worldview, a coherent geopolitical view. I think nobody likes great powers and empires, but they do provide order throughout history. And I think if we're in an era where all the great powers are in tumultuous change and in some cases decline, it will be just a more disorderly world.
I think that's absolutely right. I think that in the past, when we've seen periods of relative peace, that's because the great powers have been in some form of equilibrium, what we've learnt to call a balance of power, something that, as Robert writes about in his book, Henry Kissinger was a master in delineating. But when you have periods of rupture and decline, and also, as Robert says, when you have technology accelerating as fast as it does, then the potential for a small conflict like the Russia-Ukraine war to have percussive impacts on supply chains, on energy prices and so on, that leads those powers which are insecure and see their future as potentially darker, it sees them potentially taking risks that they would not otherwise in different circumstances. And one particular area of concern to America and to America's foreign policy elite is what China might do to Taiwan. Taiwan supplies the chips which are at the heart of America's technological superiority at the moment.
But China is bent on the unification of Taiwan with the mainland. And China also knows, and Robert, I think, has alluded to this, that one of China's problems is that the one-child policy means that it faces demographic decline. So for China's leaders, there is a shortening time window when they can achieve their historic goal of reunification. And that means that the risks everywhere are all the greater.
And in terms of Britain, then, Michael, and what should Britain's coherent geopolitical view be given all this? What if Britain is to have a realist reset, what should that look like?
I think it involves both a limitation of ambition, but also a concentration on hard power, effectively. So I think one of the challenges has been that Britain has believed that its soft power, that its global reach, that its diplomatic networks means that everywhere we can protect our interests and values. But actually we're living in a world where hard power will increasingly matter more. We see that in the demands that every European nation faces for increased defence expenditure, but we also see it in the way in which European nations, including Britain, can't rely on the old alliance network to shield it from these buffeting tides.
Robert, do you think that realists should agree with Trump and his rather harsh words for Europe? Obviously, he, as Michael says, he wants to pivot away from Europe and to China and Taiwan. But shouldn't a country like America stand with its allies in the face of a competitor like China?
Yes, realism has been misidentified, misconstrued in recent years. It's been taken over by what I think are semi-isolationists in the wake of the Iraq War, the Afghanistan withdrawal, etc. When I think of realism, I think of the realist internationalism of Henry Kissinger, George Shultz, and people, James Baker, and people like that, who believed in America's very heavy, intensive engagement in the world, but with, but with realist, age-old realist principles. I don't consider Trump a realist. I don't consider his team to be realists in any sense of the word. I think they're radical, populist, people on the far right. And, if you think about the fact that the Wall Street Journal, the news section, had a long expose of all the tortures that the Russians have inflicted on Ukrainian prisoners, which are absolutely barbaric. And yet at the same time, Trump blames Ukraine for starting the war. You see, we're dealing with an American administration that, I hope it changes, but is somewhat beyond the pale. I think, the post-war era has gone on for 80 years. That's a real long time in history with all the technological changes, the changes in identity, et cetera, in economics. 80 years is a long time in history. But I think now we're seeing the end of it.
And I think that's true. I think that this really is the end of what one might call the short or the long 20th century. It's certainly the end of a period where, in the aftermath of the Second World War, multilateral institutions were created in order to try to keep the peace, to prevent nation-states acting in a selfish way, and also to defend the West against the threat of the ideology of communism. As communism has faded, even as other threats exist, like Islamism, so these multilateral institutions have been struggling to find a purpose and struggling to maintain their legitimacy. And for Trump, as Robert points out, these multilateral institutions simply get in the way. They drain America's resources while at the same time fettering America's discretion. And the difficulty, I think, for America and for all of us is exactly as Robert says. If you have an America that is guided by enlightened self-interest, if you do have a Shultz, Baker, Kissinger view where America recognizes that it serves America's interests, for example, to ensure that the global commons, that freedom of navigation are protected, but America is not naive, it's not gimp in the hands of other nations, as it were. That is a role which is a net force for good, whatever one thinks of the morality of individual decisions. The challenge here is that Trump is at the head of popular opinion in America, and he's influenced by thinkers like Tucker Carlson, who believe that America has been suckered for too long, and the danger for us all is that what might have been a necessary reset of American foreign policy has moved towards something that is in the hands of people around Trump, who are moving towards a position which is more isolationist even than realist, perhaps.
Well, Robert, on that point then, if Trumpist isolationism is very popular in America, as Michael says, where do you think the rules-based international order went wrong in terms of losing that kind of popularity in America? Do you think it could ever return?
Remember, the rules-based international order, as I said, for 80 years has been led by America. Every organization needs a leader, or else it dissolves into incoherence. And it seems that that NATO, the West, the historic West, including the treaty allies in the Pacific, no longer have a leader. As far as the American people are concerned, it's a very glib thing to say, but it's true. But foreign policy plays very little role in how they choose to vote. I think Biden lost the election because of the high inflation and cultural issues, but predominantly the high inflation. It's sad to say, but if Trump can keep the inflation level low, I think the American people will be happy with this. Remember, there's something crucial here. As I said, 80 years is a long time. And the people who in Washington who believe in the West, in the historic Western alliance, are elites who read books and who have cut their teeth on great books and men who formulated the Western alliance at the conclusion of World War II, etc. And Trump Trump and the larger public, they're not really readers. They're post-literate. They're immersed in smartphones and social media, and they don't really read books in the way that books have been read before. We take reading for granted, the elites do. And I think we're in an age now where you have a president and his top advisors and officials who have not been schooled in the history and the traditions of the historic West. That if you ask them about the Atlantic Charter between Roosevelt and Churchill, signed in 1941 off Newfoundland, they probably have never heard of it.
I think Robert is right that I think the point is made that Donald Trump has probably written more books than he's read, and it's not even clear that he's actually read the book that he was supposed to have written. But what Trump does have is a capacity to scent a change on the wind, to deploy with almost sort of a primate instinct, the animal spirits of the time and of his people. And in that sense, he's responding exactly as Robert said to the discontent over inflation and over migration, and also the sense that America had lost too many boys in foreign wars, and that the Democrats were the people who would drag America into danger. It was his job to, tend home first, America first. There are, I think, though, people who influence the world in which Trump and his team operate. And I think, again, it's worth considering where some of those influences are. And there are certainly always two previous presidents that are cited as examples that Trump is encouraged to follow. Andrew Jackson, who is a sort of a populist figure from the early 19th century, who was solely interested in pursuing American national interest, to the utmost, and also William McKinley, the president at the end of the 19th century, who built up America's industrial strength behind a tariff wall. And even if it's unlikely that President Trump has read biographies of them. Both of those spirits, I think, do influence some of the people around Trump and therefore suffuse the atmosphere in which he operates.
Finally, a question for you both, if I may. Michael, you declare in your piece that Trump's second term marks, and I'm quoting here, a return to a bleaker, starker, more pitiless world landscape. That's quite a depressing reality, potentially. What hope do you have for the future in terms of this geopolitical landscape? And then, if I may, the same question for you, Robert.
I think it's a chill wind that blows nobody any good. And I think what this may force us to do in the United Kingdom and in Europe is to reassess our responsibility to make sure that we defend ourselves and our values better instead of relying on others to do that for us. We need alliances. I hope that we can maintain the closest possible alliance with the United States, but it also means that some of the luxury beliefs that we've indulged, we're now going to have to reassess. And I think that dealing with the world as it is rather than we would wish it to be may mean that we make fewer mistakes in the future and that we have a foreign policy that is at once more prudent and robust.
Two things. First, I agree completely on alliances. The way a great power projects its power even further is through alliances. When you don't have alliances, it's all right when the wind is at your back. But when the wind is in your face, you're very lonely. George W. Bush experienced that when he went to war in Iraq with only Great Britain. And the war turned very difficult, and it was very lonely out there. I think ultimately, mass democracy can easily turn into a tyranny of the majority, a tyranny of a 52% majority, as we're starting to see in the United States. The ultimate safety, I believe, is in historic liberalism, in the liberalism of Isaiah Berlin, John Stuart Mill, and others, because liberalism, saves the individual, but from the coercion of the crowd or wherever the animal spirits are leading us at any one moment.
Finally, Germany went to the polls this time last week, ushering in the rise of the AfD, even if they are still being locked out of coalition talks. Lisa Haseldine interviewed German journalists Constantin, Eckner and Katja.
Katja, perhaps we could start with you, if you could just take us briefly through the results that we saw last night and what happened.
Well, I think for a long time they were pretty much on a knife edge, despite the fact that there was a clear winner. So you basically had the conservative CDU, CSU winning in first place with sort of roughly just under 30% of the vote. Then the anti-immigration AfD in second place with about a fifth of the vote, actually doubling its results from last time, from 2021. And then you had the current ruling party, the SPD, sort of in third place with about 16% of the vote. Followed by the Greens, who've also lost a little bit, and then basically the smaller parties, the Liberal FDP, the sort of left-wing conservative BSW, a new party, struggling to get over the 5% that any party needs to get into the German parliament. And you had a surprising surge in sort of far-left support for Die Linke, for the left-wing party, which is in parts a successor to the East German kind of ruling party during the Cold War, which ended up on just under 9% of the vote, so quite a remarkable result for them. So for what Germans were kind of looking at is it possible for the Conservative Party to form a two-way coalition only with the centre-left SPD, who's just lost a lot of support, or will they need a third coalition partner? Because basically it's ruled out working with the AfD. It's kind of a post-war German taboo. It's known as the firewall, where all parties agree not to work with the AfD. And so that means it has to turn left, either to one party or even to two parties to form a coalition. So many Germans worried in advance that it might just lead to a completely unstable outcome. They've just had a three-way coalition for 3 years, and that worried a lot of people that they might get a repeat of the division and of the squabbling that involved. And now overnight it's emerged that possibly two of the smaller parties haven't made it across the 5% line, which then allows this two-way coalition to just about form a majority.
And Constantin, who do you think the biggest winners and losers of the night were? Because it does seem like, particularly sort of even the CDU, despite becoming the biggest party in the new formation, the Bundestag, still performed worse than perhaps they had expected, definitely worse than some of the polls had been suggesting. Similarly, actually, I think with the AfD as well, there were big expectations that they would perhaps cross that 20% threshold, and they've just fallen short of it, I think. So I was just wondering, who do you think, the biggest winners and losers are?
Of course, the biggest losers are the two parties who didn't get beyond the 5% barrier, because then you're out of the parliament, or you're not getting in, as it is concerning Sarah Wagenknecht's new populist left party. But as Katja just explained, that helps maybe in terms of forming a new coalition in a political landscape and a party landscape that has become much more fragmented, which makes negotiations, of course, much more complicated than in past times. When it comes to winners, AfD are one of the main winners. You could argue that maybe they could have even done better. Alice Weidel, their leading candidate, she didn't really perform well in televised debates, or even that highly recognized talk on X with Elon Musk. She didn't really do well. She didn't really make any specific points beyond anti-immigration policies and maybe returning to nuclear power. That's two of the points she makes repeatedly. Anything else, when she's pressed on certain issues, she not really answers with any specifics and just argues that the market will regulate things and stuff like that. I mean, that's not enough, I think. But still, they are one of the biggest winners, AfD, especially when you look at the fact that the turnout was at 84%, so the highest since German unification, meaning that the AfD is not just supported by, let's say, motivated protest voters, but they are supported by a huge chunk of the German population, actually, and they received up to 20 or even beyond 20% of the votes, even in the wealthy southern and southwestern German states, where you could argue, all right, people are still doing well. It's not just that they might be against anything that's going on in Germany, but they are still turning out and turning up and voting for the AfD. So they are one of the big winners, and the other are the left, Die Linke, because they were essentially basically pronounced dead a couple of weeks ago or a couple of months ago, when Sarah Wagenknecht and her group split from the party, did well at state elections, and you thought the left are basically done, but then they re-emerged, had some help. Lucky circumstances also helped them in a sense, but I think that they actually staged a comeback and are back in and the return to the parliament can be actually recorded as a huge success for the left. So you see on the fringes, two parties were winners, and in the middle, a number of losers.
And Constantin, could you take us through briefly what it is that we can expect to happen next? Because, of course, in Britain we have an election, the result is called, and that transition of power happens immediately, so we have a new prime minister the following day. But things don't quite work like that in Germany, so I was wondering, could you explain to us how things will happen from here on?
Yeah, so up until a new government is formed and a new government is elected and voted on in the parliament, Olaf Scholz remains in the chancellor's office for the time being. Friedrich Merz has talked about the fact that he wants to form a new government until Easter, which might happen. I mean, negotiations between the conservative parties, the two parties, this Christian Democratic and Christian Social Alliance, and the Social Democrats, they will essentially start immediately, but these negotiations might take a couple of weeks. Once they agree on a number of points and reach an entire agreement, then there will be a vote in the parliament, and then a new government will be formed, because then the chancellor will be voted on and all the other ministers and so on and so on. So and up until that point, the previous government or the current government is still in place and can still run things in a sense, but of course the current government doesn't have a majority in the parliament anymore. So it's actually in everyone's interest, I think, that a new government will be formed as soon as possible. And Olaf Scholz also wants to, as things are right now, I think he wants to leave the post as soon as possible, because he's out the door. He doesn't want to be involved in negotiations. So Olaf Scholz, for the time being, is done as a major power broker in Berlin.
Katja, I thought perhaps we could talk a little bit about the AfD, because this election result basically awards them the title of sort of leader of the opposition. They are they will be the second biggest party in this new parliament. What powers will that give them? Will that give them any particular privileges, or is it more about the influence that they will now have because there will be more of them in the parliament?
I think it gives them a huge amount of power. I mean, ultimately, the Conservatives ran on a manifesto of dealing with two of the things that the AfD has been talking about for a long time. So that's immigration and a sort of deregulation of the economy, a more libertarian cause there. Those are both things where they've actually got more overlap with the AfD than they do with the left-wing parties. And so this puts Alice Weidel, the leader of the AfD, now in a position where on everything where there's compromise with the left, she can sort of sit there and say, well, our door is open. You know, you could always come to us and do the thing that you've actually promised your voters to do. And she already started that last night. I thought it was really interesting that she sort of sat there, barely able to hide the sort of smile on her face, you know, about the result. And said exactly that, you know, you promised your voters to have very, very strict immigration rules and border controls and deportations of unsuccessful asylum seekers and criminals. You won't be able to do any of that in its pure form as you promised it with a left-wing coalition partner. You can do it with us. And interestingly, Merz had already tried to do exactly that just before the election when he was still in opposition. He basically tried to implement some of these changes, put them to parliament. The AfD voted on it. The SPD didn't. So that, you know, puts the AfD in a position where all it really has to do is either support some of the measures, in which case the SPD will be uneasy about that, you know, kind of voting on something that the AfD also votes on. Or they can kind of sit there and say, well, this isn't what you promised to do, so why don't you just break this firewall down and work with us instead. So it's incredibly easy for them to kind of just sit back. They don't have to come up with specific policies or modify their own program or get involved with the messy business of compromise politics that is sort of at the heart of German democracy. And they can just wait for things to get watered down or to, you know, diverge from the promises that Merz has made. And then all they have to do is point out to conservative and centre-right voters who appear to be in the majority at the moment, that it's the firewall that's presenting Merz with these kind of dilemmas, and therefore that's a political choice.
And Constantin, what would you say Friedrich Merz's priorities are or will have to be once he does become Chancellor?
Yeah, I think two things are mainly important to him right now. First, of course, addressing immigration, illegal immigration, cutting down on immigration, putting higher barriers in place in terms of asylum seekers and just immigration in general. I mean, there is also an argument to be made that an aging society such as Germany, but also many other Central European societies are aging at this point. You need some sort of immigration of professionals, young professionals who can take certain jobs in certain industries where maybe Germans are not really comfortable to joining these industries anymore in a wealthy society. But still, I mean, he wants to cut down on immigration significantly. And the other main issue right now that he wants to address, especially as someone who's basically running as let's say a business and industry specialist, he wants to revitalize Germany's economy in general, especially key sectors like the automotive sector. And there he has to address non-labor wage costs, for instance, social welfare system, high costs in general, because that's what's really hurting certain industries like the automotive sector, that the wage costs and the costs in general are too high. I mean, there are certain industries where you compare Germany to Switzerland, and a German worker might even be more expensive than a Swiss worker, although the Swiss worker receives a much higher salary. But because of the welfare system and all these non-wage salary costs, the German worker is actually more expensive to an employer. So that's something that has to be addressed. And I think Friedrich Merz wants to address these things as soon as possible. If he finds common ground with the Social Democrats, remains to be seen.
And Katja, what do you think he will do in terms of dealing with Donald Trump, the sort of American withdrawal, if we like, from Europe, and also, of course, the question of Ukraine and how Germany will or might continue to support them in the conflict with Russia?
Well, his party, the CDU, is basically the transatlanticist party. It always has been. That's sort of one of their sort of part of their core identity as a political party. Since the end of the Second World War, they've always said Germany is firmly a Western country, needs to be anchored to the West, and therefore look to the US as a partner. So it was interesting last night to see this kind of odd divergence of Merz being incredibly critical of Donald Trump and his policies, and yet Donald Trump came out saying this is a great day for Germany that Merz has won. So I'm sure they'll find some sort of way to come back together and work something out in terms of security in Europe, because ultimately I think everyone wants whatever the deal is in Ukraine, whatever the peace deal will be, everyone has an interest in upholding it and making sure that European security is up to that. So to me, the obvious solution is that Germany takes a stronger role in supporting that, potentially even with troops, to say that it really means business in the center of Europe as the sort of largest economy and also the geopolitical center of gravity. And in exchange, perhaps the US might be willing to put some sort of security backstop as a weight behind that and say, if this isn't enough, then we'll step in to add the deterrence value. That seems to me the kind of compromise that they might come to in terms of moving forward. Because the Conservatives have already said that they do want to beef up the defense budget over time, certainly well above 2%, which Germany hasn't done for a long time. So that's a bigger step up than it sounds at the moment. And secondly, that he is also willing to sort of maybe introduce some form of compulsory military service again as well. So certainly there's a change of culture there that might lead to more investment. Where the money is going to come from is still unclear, because the Conservatives are also fiscally conservative. Then they're not happy to take up more debt to spend on this. So Friedrich Merz, whenever he was asked, he's kind of said, well, this will come out of the growth that we'll generate. So that is potentially an issue. But one way or another, you can sense that this reluctance of Germany to get involved in things is the most likely to break under him, I would say, than compared to previous governments where all military things were still kind of treated with some caution.
That's all for this week. Don't forget to leave your feedback in the comments. We'll see you next week.